Section 1. The House on Spooner Street. Close your eyes for a second and just imagine it. Not the chaos of the show itself, not the jokes or the noise or the cutaways, just the setting, just the world. A quiet street somewhere in Newport County, Rhode Island. The air smells like Atlantic salt and old oak trees, and something vaguely like a barbecue that someone started a little too early. There is a modest two-story house, painted in that particular shade of white that has gone just slightly yellow from years of New England weather. The paint is not peeling, but it is not pristine either. It is the paint job of a house that gets around to maintenance eventually, just not today, and probably not tomorrow either. The front yard is a thin ribbon of grass with a concrete walkway cutting through the middle of it. The walkway leads up 3 wide steps to a red front door. Nothing dramatic about it, nothing grand. It is just a door into a house on a street called Spooner Street, in a fictional town called Quahog, which is named after the type of saltwater clam found all along the Rhode Island coastline. A quahog, for anyone who doesn't know, is a hard-shelled clam that can live for over 100 years buried in the sand. There is something almost poetic about naming a town full of dysfunctional, chaotic, stubborn characters after a creature known for outlasting everything around it by just refusing to be dug up. The house inside, if you picture it in your mind, is arranged in the specific casual disorder of a home that is genuinely lived in. The living room has a sofa that has absorbed years of television watching. There are throw pillows that get moved every time someone sits down and never quite end up back where they started. There is a television set positioned across from the sofa, and that television has been on for more hours than anyone in the house would ever admit. The kitchen has one of those refrigerators that holds everything leftovers in various stages of forgottenness, condiments with crusted caps, a drawer that was once designated for deli items that now just has whatever needs a home. The counters are never completely clear. Upstairs, there are 4 bedrooms. One belongs to Peter and Lois Griffin, the 2 parents who are the axis around which this whole ridiculous world spins. One belongs to Meg, the oldest child, who has decorated her room in the way that teenage girls decorate rooms when they are trying to figure out who they are and have not fully arrived at an answer yet. One belongs to Chris, the middle kid, whose room has a quality of comfortable mess that suggests a person who is not worried about things enough to organize them. And the last room, the one at the end of the hall, the one that gets the most interesting visitors and contains the most terrifying secrets, belongs to Stewie. Outside that house, the neighborhood breathes with the low hum of suburban Rhode Island life. Across the street lives Quagmire, in a house that is similar in layout but radically different in atmosphere. A few doors down is Joe Swanson's place, where the driveway has a wheelchair ramp that was built with obvious care and pride. Cleveland Brown, for the earlier seasons at least, lived just next door, his calm and steady presence a counterbalance to the turbulence on all sides. These are the coordinates of the world we are about to sink into tonight. Not fast, not rushed. Slowly, the way you drift into sleep, which is the way good storytelling used to work before everything had to be immediate and loud. We are going to walk through this world room by room, character by character, episode by episode, moment by moment. By the time we are done, you will know this fictional little corner of fictional Rhode Island better than some places you have actually been to. And you will hopefully be deeply, completely, comfortably asleep. Seth MacFarlane created this world from a very specific place. He grew up in Kent, Connecticut, which sits about a 2-hour drive from Providence, Rhode Island. He studied animation at the Rhode Island School of Design, which is one of the most prestigious art and design schools in the country, sitting right in the heart of Providence. So Rhode Island was not chosen randomly. It was the landscape of his formative years, the streets and weather patterns and particular New England social attitudes that shaped him. The accents, the brusqueness, the way people in that part of the country can be simultaneously warm and abrasive. Those qualities became embedded in Peter Griffin's voice and personality from the very beginning. MacFarlane had been working on 2 short animated films during his time at RISD and shortly after, called The Life of Larry and Steve. These films, completed between 1995 and 1997, featured a middle-aged, not particularly clever man named Larry and a cultured, sardonic talking dog named Steve. If you watch them, and they are available online, you will see the DNA of Family Guy immediately. Larry walks like Peter. He talks like Peter. He makes the particular kind of bad decision that Peter Griffin turned into an art form. And Steve carries himself with exactly the restrained, worldly exhaustion that Brian Griffin would later embody with such precision. Fox executives saw those shorts and asked MacFarlane to expand the concept into a full series. He changed the names. He built a family around the central characters. He created Stewie from scratch. We will spend a great deal of time with Stewie later, and he pitched a 15-minute pilot to Fox in May of 1998. Fox gave it the green light. The show premiered on the 31st of January 1999, right after Super Bowl 33, which gave it one of the most coveted debut audiences in television. Roughly 22 million people watched that first episode, which is a number that puts it in rarefied air for a new animated series. But tonight is not about the business of the show. It is about the world of it, the characters in it, the feeling of settling into those early episodes when everything was still being established, when you could feel genuine affection underneath all the absurdity, when the Griffin family felt like a family that loved each other despite producing enough chaos to fill several police reports. So settle in, get comfortable. The house on Spooner Street is quiet right now. The TV is off for once. The drunken clam is closed. Quagmire has, against all probability, had an early night. Joe Swanson is parked in his driveway, just looking up at the stars, the way he sometimes does when the neighborhood is peaceful. And we are going to stay here for a while, wandering through every corner of this world, meeting every character, revisiting every room, until the night gets so still and so soft that sleep just finds you. Section 2, Peter Griffin in full. There is a specific kind of person that Peter Griffin was designed to represent, and if you grew up anywhere in the northeastern United States, you probably know this person. Not this exact person, nobody is quite this extreme in real life, but someone in the same neighborhood of personality. The big guy at the end of the bar. The loud one at the company cookout who keeps everyone laughing until he says the one thing that makes the room go quiet. The father who would do anything for his family and consistently makes the worst possible decisions in the process of trying. Peter Lovenbroek Griffin Sr. is his full name, and the middle name is, of course, a beer brand. His full name is a joke and a piece of character design at the same time, because Peter's relationship with beer is not incidental. It is not a quirk. It is close to a spiritual practice. Pawtucket Patriot Ale, brewed at the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery where Peter works, is the drink of his faith. He holds a can of it with the comfortable familiarity that other men hold a coffee mug or a TV remote. It is almost always there, in his hand or nearby, a prop and a comfort, and in some episodes practically a character unto itself. Peter's voice was inspired by the security guards Seth MacFarlane encountered during his time at RISD. There was a particular quality to those voices, a loud, flat, New England working-class intonation, the kind of voice that carries across a parking lot without the owner seeming to intend it. MacFarlane heard that voice and something clicked. He found a rhythm in it, a way of delivering lines that made even mundane statements sound somehow both authoritative and clueless at the same time. Peter Griffin speaks the way someone talks when they are absolutely certain they are right about something they have never actually thought through. His sentences end with conviction even when the content doesn't merit it. His backstory is richer than it might first appear. Peter was born in Mexico, the show gets into this with some detail, and was raised in Rhode Island by his adoptive father, Francis Griffin, an Irish Catholic man of deep piety and considerable emotional rigidity. Francis, voiced by the late Charles Durning, was a presence of guilt and obligation in Peter's life, the kind of father who loved his son but expressed that love primarily through disappointment. It is possible to draw a fairly direct line from the way Peter was raised to many of the ways Peter behaves as an adult, though the show rarely does this work explicitly. It leaves it there for you to find if you are paying attention. Peter's biological father, discovered later in the series, is an Irish man named Mickey McFinnigan, which is so Irish a name that it has an almost mythological quality. The episode where Peter tracks down his biological father and finds this wild, drinking, laughing, reckless man is one of the funniest and also strangely one of the most revealing episodes in the show's run, because in that moment you understand that Peter did not become who he is entirely by accident. Mickey McFinnigan is essentially Peter with less American polish and even fewer filters, and watching Peter meet him is like watching someone look at a funhouse mirror that is more accurate than a regular one. Before he landed his shipping clerk position at the Pawtucket Brewery, Peter worked at the Happy-Go-Lucky Toy Factory, which the show's lore clearly models on Hasbro, the actual toy company headquartered in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Peter on an assembly line, surrounded by toys, responsible for quality control he is spectacularly unequipped to provide, is a concept so perfectly matched to his personality that it barely even reads as satire. It just reads as obvious casting. He was not good at the toy factory job. He is not particularly good at the brewery job either, but the brewery at least fits him on a personal level, because the product of his labor is something he genuinely believes in. The address where the Griffins live is 31 Spooner Street, and the house has a specific layout that becomes familiar over hundreds of episodes. The staircase is on the right when you walk in. The living room sits directly ahead, with the couch positioned for maximum television viewing efficiency. The kitchen is to the left, accessible through the living room, and it has one of those kitchen table setups where the family nominally eats meals together, but where meaningful conversation mostly happens by accident rather than design. The backyard has a fence, a patch of grass, and enough space for the various outdoor misadventures that the show periodically delivers. What made early Peter work so well as a character, and this is a thing worth sitting with tonight, because it is the version of Peter that feels warmest and most worth spending time with, was that underneath all the recklessness and stupidity, he was a man who genuinely wanted to do right by his family. He just kept getting in his own way. The gap between his intentions and his outcomes was the source of almost every joke, but the intentions were real. In the earliest seasons, when Peter would mess up, and he messed up constantly, structurally, as a matter of function, he would eventually recognize what he had done wrong and try to fix it. Not always successfully, not always gracefully, but he tried. There is a warmth in a character who is genuinely trying, even when they are spectacularly bad at it. You can root for someone like that. You can find them endearing. When Peter was introduced as the lovable dimwit, the joke was always that he was in over his head and knew it somewhere deep down, even if the surface message was confidence. The contrast between his certainty and his competence was where the humor lived. Peter's physical design is deliberate in a way that rewards attention. He is drawn with a round belly that suggests decades of beer and drive-through. His chin juts forward in a way that communicates stubbornness without a word being spoken. His glasses are a period detail that grounds him in a specific kind of American working-class male image. His physical comedy, the way he falls, the way he runs, the way he freezes for a half second before reacting to something gives his animation a rubbery, almost Looney Tunes quality that the show consistently used well in its early seasons. His relationship with the four main men in his neighborhood is one of the show's great underappreciated elements. Peter, Quagmire, Joe, and Cleveland fit together in a way that captures something true about the social architecture of adult male friendship. They are not the most similar people. They have profoundly different lives, values, and worldviews. But they show up at the Drunken Clam together because the ritual of showing up matters more than the things they would say if you ask them to articulate why they are friends. They are friends because they keep being friends. That is both the comedy and the substance of it. We should talk about the giant chicken, because to talk about Peter Griffin without talking about the giant chicken is like describing a symphony and leaving out the section that repeats for 10 minutes. The giant chicken, whose actual name is Ernie the Giant Chicken, though the show often doesn't bother with the name, is a recurring character who periodically appears to fight Peter in elaborate, city-destroying brawls that stretch across entire episodes. The original inciting incident was a coupon that had expired. Peter felt wronged. The chicken disagreed. And then somehow the fight escalated to the point where buildings were collapsing and vehicles were being used as weapons, all because of a piece of paper with a date on it. The giant chicken fights are a masterwork of escalation comedy. They start with something absurdly small and grow into something that would qualify as a natural disaster. What makes them work, what makes them genuinely watchable, even when the show uses the premise multiple times, is that they are drawn and animated with total commitment. The show never winks at the audience during these sequences. It treats them with the visual seriousness of an action film, which is precisely why they are so funny. The gap between how the fight is presented and how little it should matter is enormous, and the show lives in that gap. Peter Griffin, taken in total, is a portrait of American suburban fatherhood viewed through a carnival mirror that has been smashed and reassembled slightly wrong. He is not a smart man, but he is a man who loves his town, loves his bar, loves his wife even when he makes her want to scream, and loves his children, even the ones he struggles to show it to. In the early years of the show, when that love was clearly visible even through the chaos, Peter Griffin was one of the funniest and most affectionate portrayals of working-class American manhood that animated television had ever produced. Peter is a man who once declared himself immortal and jumped off a building, who once became convinced he was a genius, who once got into a weeks-long fight with a giant crab, who once ate an entire block of cheese in a single sitting because he had decided he was a different kind of man that day. He is Peter Griffin. And even now, with all the years the show has had to complicate that portrait, the version of him that lives in your memory from those early seasons is still warm, still funny, still somehow endearing despite everything. He is the man at the center of the house on Spooner Street, and the house would not be the same without him. Section 3. Brian, the dog who thought he was human. The year is 1999. A show about a dysfunctional family premieres on Fox, and its most intellectually sophisticated character, its moral compass, its narrative anchor is a dog. Not a talking dog played for absurdist laughs, not a cartoon dog doing dog things with human subtitles, but a dog who orders martinis, has opinions about literature, drives a car, and sits in therapy sessions trying to work through his fear of commitment. A dog who is, in almost every way that matters, more human than most of the humans sharing the screen with him. Brian Griffin is the family dog, technically. He lives in their house, eats their food, sleeps there, goes to the vet when things go wrong. Physically, the infrastructure of his life is entirely canine, but his inner life, his social life, his intellectual life are entirely human, and the show played that contrast with a specific kind of dry, low-key humor that felt genuinely different from what else was on television at the time. Brian's voice is Seth MacFarlane speaking in a measured, slightly nasal register calm, where Peter is loud, deliberate, where Peter is impulsive. The voice carries a quality of exhausted intelligence, the tone of someone who has been the smartest person in every room he has entered but has somehow never managed to make that work in his favor. It is the voice of a man who has read all the right books and still can't quite figure out what to do with himself. In the first 3 seasons of Family Guy, Brian was the character who kept the show tethered to something recognizable. When Peter's schemes grew too absurd, Brian was the one who pointed that out, not necessarily to stop the scheme, but to acknowledge that normal reality had once existed and that they had left it behind. His dry commentary on the situations around him was one of the most consistent sources of humor in those early episodes, and it worked because it felt earned. Brian was not a punchline. He was the audience's representative inside the show, the character who saw things the way you saw them and reacted accordingly. His personal life in those early seasons was written with surprising care. He had been working on a novel for years, not just as a one-time throwaway detail, but as a recurring element of who he was, the kind of project a certain type of intelligent, creative, melancholic person carries around for years without finishing, always planning to get back to it, always telling people about it at parties in a way that sounds impressive but is also a little bit sad. That unfinished novel said more about Brian than any individual plot summary could. It was the proof that he had ambitions beyond his circumstances, and the honesty that he had not yet figured out how to close that gap. He drank. That was also part of who he was in a way that the show treated with more sensitivity than it usually gets credit for. Not played for laughs in those early seasons, or at least not only for laughs. There was an understanding that Brian drank because he was lonely in a specific way that intelligent people without clear purpose sometimes get lonely, and that the martinis were both a personality statement and a coping mechanism. They were the right drink for the character he was performing, and also the thing he reached for when the performance got tiring. He had feelings for Lois. This was handled extremely carefully in the early seasons, in a way that made it sympathetic rather than creepy. Brian was in love with a woman who was unattainable and who, moreover, seemed genuinely happy with her husband despite all evidence that the husband probably should not make anyone happy. The way Brian managed those feelings, burying them, redirecting them, occasionally letting them surface in small ways that Lois mostly didn't notice, gave him a genuine ache that made him feel like a real character rather than a comedy device. His friendship with Peter is one of the show's foundational relationships, and it works because it is based on complementarity rather than similarity. These two are not alike. They do not share taste, intelligence, worldview, or temperament. Peter is loud, Brian is quiet. Peter acts without thinking, Brian thinks without always acting. Peter doesn't read, Brian does, and yet there is a genuine affection between them. the kind that sometimes grows between very different people who have spent a lot of time in the same space and have developed loyalty through proximity and habit. Peter genuinely values Brian in a way that he does not always express but that shows up in the moments that count. Brian drives a Toyota Prius in later seasons, which is a perfect piece of character design. Of course Brian drives a Prius. Of course he does. It is the car of a man who wants to make a small statement about his values through a consumer choice, which is also slightly self-congratulatory in a way that is completely consistent with who Brian is. He has had many relationships over the course of the show, and the early ones were written with genuine tenderness. There was a recurring note in his romantic life, of finding women who were interesting and smart and who made him feel like maybe this time it would work out, and then discovering some fundamental mismatch that sent him back to the house on Spooner Street and the martini glass and the unfinished novel. Those are not funny stories as descriptions. But the way the show handled them in its early seasons had a warmth that made Brian's loneliness feel like something you cared about, rather than something you watched from a safe distance. One of the most important things about Brian in those first seasons was that he was the bridge between Stewie and the rest of the family. Stewie, as we will cover in depth in the next section, was initially a largely solitary character whose schemes happened in a kind of private space. Brian was the one who could hear him, understand him, and respond. Their relationship was not yet the emotional center it would later become. In those early seasons, it was more of a peripheral connection than a central one, but you could feel it developing. Brian recognized something in Stewie that the other characters couldn't see, and Stewie recognized in Brian the one person in the house worth talking to. There is a quiet dignity to the early Brian Griffin that the character managed to maintain even while existing as a dog in a world of humans who treated that fact with remarkable casualness. Nobody makes a big deal of Brian being a dog, except in the specific circumstances where the show wants to make a joke of it. Mostly he is just accepted as a member of the family with full social privileges, and the show's commitment to that premise gave Brian the space to be a real character rather than a gimmick. There is a specific image that crystallizes early Brian for a lot of people who have been watching the show since the beginning. Brian at the bar, a martini in front of him, leaning on the counter in that particular way that says he has nowhere specific to be and is using that fact to his advantage. He is present without being intrusive. He is engaged without being loud. He is the kind of company that makes the room feel calmer just by being in it. That Brian, that specific early version, is one of animated television's most gently rendered portraits of a certain kind of yearning, intelligent, slightly self-defeating person, and he is worth spending time with, quietly, on a night like this one. Section 4. Stewie Griffin, Tiny Tyrant. Imagine a baby. 1-year-old, sitting in a high chair in a kitchen in Rhode Island, wearing a yellow shirt and a diaper, eating strained peas from a small rubber spoon. Now imagine that this baby is simultaneously in his own bedroom, completing the wiring on a plasma cannon intended to subjugate the eastern seaboard. These two facts exist at the same time, in the same small body, and the comedy of Stewie Griffin lives entirely in that collision of scales. The mundanity of babyhood, absolute and total, pressed up against ambitions of world conquest. Stewie Griffin is one of the most original character concepts in the history of American animated television. That is not hyperbole or nostalgia, it is just true. There were, at the time of Family Guy's premiere in 1999, exactly 0 characters like Stewie Griffin on television. There had been precocious children. There had been unusually intelligent animated characters. There had been villain archetypes. But there had not been a 1-year-old baby with a refined British accent who addressed people with the contemptuous formality of a Victorian villain, who had built functional advanced weaponry in his nursery, and whose primary life goal was the elimination of his own mother. McFarlane has said in interviews that Stewie started as just a drawing of a baby with no personality, an oval-headed infant with football-shaped cranium. It was only when the voice and the concept were layered onto that drawing that the character snapped into focus. The British accent was a specific choice designed to create maximum contrast with the physical reality of an American baby in a diaper. British received pronunciation carries associations of class, sophistication, education, and a certain theatrical quality that is inherently funny in that context. It also gave the character a sense of cultural displacement. He sounds like he belongs somewhere else, somewhere more formal, and is deeply irritated by the domestic circumstances he has found himself in. The detail that makes Stewie's British accent even funnier, once you know it, is that Seth MacFarlane spent years working on that voice specifically. He was trained in vocal technique by Lee and Sally Sweetland, the vocal coaches who had worked with Frank Sinatra and Barbra Streisand, among others. So, the precision of Stewie's enunciation is not accidental. Every consonant is deliberate. The character has a vocal quality that is cleaner and more precisely articulated than almost any other character on television, animated or otherwise, which makes the content of what he says, plans for murder, instructions for ray gun assembly, diatribes against his mother, all the more surreal. In the first season of Family Guy, Stewie's schemes were presented with a commitment that treated them as entirely real within the show's universe. His plan to assassinate Lois was not a throwaway gag in those early episodes. It was a running thread. He would construct elaborate mechanisms in his bedroom, give monologues about the specifics of his world domination strategy, and occasionally make attempts on Lois's life that she would then not notice or would interpret as normal baby behavior. The dramatic irony was perfect. Lois would pick Stewie up, hug him, call him her sweet boy, completely unaware that the child in her arms was internally composing the wording for her epitaph. The machines Stewie built in those early seasons were detailed in a way that suggested the writers had actually thought about what an evil genius baby would construct, a mind control device aimed at getting what he wanted from the adults around him. A shrink ray that he used with the pragmatism of someone who has needed to use a shrink ray before and is comfortable with the logistics. A time machine, and this becomes important, built in a room that also contains a changing table and blocks and a stuffed bear named Rupert, who deserves his own extended mention. Rupert is Stewie's stuffed bear. He has been with Stewie since the character's introduction and serves several functions simultaneously. He is the one object of pure, uncomplicated affection in Stewie's life. Stewie's relationship with Rupert is tender and devoted in a way that his relationships with other characters rarely achieve. He talks to Rupert. He includes Rupert in plans. He becomes genuinely distressed when Rupert is in any danger. The contrast between this warmth toward a stuffed animal and Stewie's general disposition toward actual people is both funny and revealing. It suggests that the capacity for love is there. It has just been directed at something that cannot disappoint him. The time machine that Stewie builds is one of the show's most elastic narrative devices. It does not look like the time machines of science fiction films. It is recognizably Stewie's in its design, compact, functional, slightly improvised looking, the kind of machine that an evil genius builds in a nursery would look like if it were made with nursery-available materials supplemented by whatever Stewie had borrowed, stolen, or ordered online. Over the seasons, the time machine becomes the vehicle for some of the show's best episodes, particularly the ones in which Stewie and Brian use it to travel to historical periods and manage to be entirely wrong for every single one of them. The Road to Germany episode is a good example of the time machine at work. Mort Goldman, the neighborhood pharmacist, stumbles into Stewie's room and accidentally activates the device, which sends him to 1939 Poland 3 days before the German invasion. Stewie and Brian then have to follow him back and navigate Nazi-occupied Europe to retrieve him, and the episode somehow manages to be both historically engaged and relentlessly funny without being offensive about it, which is a difficult balance that required genuine care in the writing. Stewie's response to finding himself in World War II Europe is not panic. It is mild irritation and organizational competence, which is exactly who Stewie is. His relationship with Lois in the early seasons had layers. On the surface, he wanted her dead. This was not ambiguous. He announced it regularly, plotted against it with great energy, and occasionally made physical attempts that were thwarted by the general uselessness of his tiny body. But underneath that, and the show was careful not to make this too explicit, which preserved the character's menace, was a baby who was also, inescapably, a baby. He needed her. He relied on her. He was dependent on a person he was simultaneously trying to destroy, and that contradiction was the engine of his character. The world domination plans were in part a way of processing the helplessness of being 1 year old in a body that cannot yet do what the mind demands of it. The Season 6 two-parter called Stewie Kills Lois and Lois Kills Stewie is worth extended attention tonight, not because of its ending the twist that it was all a simulation on Stewie's computer, but because of what it committed to for most of its runtime. In these episodes, Stewie actually does what he has been planning since the first episode. He achieves it. He kills Lois. And in the aftermath, he takes over the world, exactly as advertised. He becomes the global dictator he always said he would be. He has robots. He has a headquarters. He has the kind of world domination infrastructure that he had been building toward for years of fictional time. And for the length of those episodes, the show honored the sincerity of everything Stewie had been working toward. Then it took it away, as the show took most big things away, with a reset. But for a few episodes, Stewie Griffin got to be everything he had promised to be. And it was satisfying in a way that few payoffs on the show ever managed to achieve. As the seasons progressed, Stewie changed dramatically. His evil genius persona was gradually retired in favor of a softer, more emotionally available character whose central relationship was the friendship with Brian. The world domination plots became rarer and eventually almost disappeared. The attempts on Lois's life faded. The character who had once described his plans in detail and executed them with terrifying creativity became instead a character whose storylines centered on his identity, his feelings, his relationships, and his need to be understood. Whether this was the right direction for the character is a conversation the show's fandom has been having for 2 decades. What is certain is that the friendship between Stewie and Brian produced some of the show's most emotionally resonant content. The episode called Brian and Stewie, set almost entirely in a bank vault where the two characters are accidentally locked overnight, is one of the most purely excellent episodes in the show's entire run. No cutaways, no secondary plot, no other characters. Just 2 individuals, technically a baby and a dog, but practically 2 people with an unusual and genuine friendship talking to each other honestly about who they are and what they fear. Brian reveals that he keeps a gun in the vault as a contingency because there are times when he does not see a reason to continue. Stewie reveals how much Brian means to him, in the raw, direct way that only a character who speaks like a Victorian villain can somehow make feel completely earnest. That episode is proof that Stewie, in his evolved form, was capable of genuine emotional depth. It is also proof that the show, at its best, could produce something that felt like real drama dressed in cartoon clothes. The evil genius baby was one of animation's great original concepts. The softer, more searching Stewie who emerged over the years produced some of the show's most beautiful emotional material. Both are true. Both versions of this character deserve to be visited on a quiet night like this one, when you have the time to sit with the detail of them. Stewie's bedroom, incidentally, is the most interesting room in the house on Spooner Street. It has a crib that he never seems to sleep in. It has a changing table that functions as a work surface. The walls have been used to mount various devices in various states of assembly. There is a whiteboard for planning. There is Rupert on the shelf. And in the corner, or under the floorboards, or behind a false panel, depending on which episode you are in, there is whatever weapon Stewie is currently working on. A nursery and a laboratory at the same time, existing in the same small room, because Stewie Griffin contains multitudes, even at 1 year of age. Section 5. Lois, Meg, Chris, and the supporting world. The house on Spooner Street belongs to Peter in the sense that his energy fills it, his decisions disrupt it, and his chaos defines the arc of most of its days. But it runs because of Lois. It survives because of Lois. The organizational coherence of the Griffin household, which is not high, but is higher than 0, which is what it would be without her, exists because Lois Patrice Griffin, née Pewterschmidt, has decided that this is the life she chose, and she is going to keep it together even when it resists every attempt. Lois is voiced by Alex Borstein, who brings to the character a nasal, slightly adenoidal New England accent that has a music of its own. The voice suggests someone who has spent years developing patience and has developed a lot of it, but is running closer to the end of her reserves than she usually lets on. Borstein's delivery of Lois's lines has a specific quality. There is always a faint current of something underneath the composure, something that might be exasperation or might be fondness or might be both at once, held together by the kind of will that mothers in chaotic households develop as a matter of survival. Lois grew up rich. This is a fact about her that the show returns to periodically, because it is a key piece of context for understanding why she is who she is. Her maiden name, Pewterschmidt, belongs to one of New England's old money families. Her father, Carter Pewterschmidt, is a patrician billionaire whose contempt for Peter is one of the show's most durable running threads. Carter does not hide his feelings about his daughter marrying a man like Peter. He is baffled by the choice. He occasionally helps the Griffins out of specific crises, but he does so with the energy of someone who resents being asked. His interactions with Peter are a two-handed comedy of class condescension from one direction and cheerful obliviousness from the other. and they work because neither character ever fully understands where the other one is coming from. Lois chose Peter. That is the remarkable thing the show established from the beginning, and that gives everything else its framing. She did not marry Peter because there was no one else, or because she was swept away, or because she made a mistake she is too proud to admit. She married him because she wanted to. There is something in Lois that found something in Peter that she valued. Something that the Pewter-Schmidt world with its galas and its board meetings and its expectations could not offer. The chaos and warmth of the Griffin household is, in some sense, exactly what she signed up for. That awareness gives her character a groundedness that prevents her from becoming simply a victim of circumstances. She plays piano. This is a detail that shows up consistently enough to be a real part of who she is rather than an incidental character note. In the early seasons, especially, there are moments of Lois at the piano that function as brief reprieves from the main story. Little pockets of calm in which the music she plays suggests a person who has an inner life that the comedy of the show doesn't always have room to explore fully. She teaches piano lessons to neighborhood children, which brings its own chaotic subplot energy when the neighborhood children include the particular specimens that populate Spooner Street. Lois also has a set of skills and qualities that the show deployed effectively in specific episodes. She was, at one point, revealed to have had a past as a shoplifter, a skill she returns to with surprising ease when circumstances require it. She has a competitive streak that emerges most dramatically in athletic or game contexts, where the character transforms from patient suburban mother into something considerably more driven and somewhat frightening. She briefly became mayor of the fictional town. She briefly became a boxing champion. She became a model. She worked as a flight attendant. These episodes worked because they gave Lois agency and competence beyond the domestic, which the show's best writing recognized she had in abundance, and its lesser writing sometimes forgot to acknowledge. Her relationship with each of her children is calibrated differently. With Meg, the early warmth is real even though the middle seasons of the show would undercut it badly. With Chris, she has a patience that reads as genuine affection. Chris is the child who is least threatening to parent because he wants so little beyond comfort and food and occasionally for someone to be nice to him. With Stewie, she has a relationship that the character of Stewie has made one of animated television's greatest dramatic ironies. She loves this baby with complete sincerity, and he has spent years trying to have her killed. The gap between her devotion and his schemes is a permanent source of quiet comedy, but also something genuinely touching if you think about it from Lois's side. Now, Meg. Margaret Griffin, voiced by Mila Kunis from the second season onward, is the oldest child, and she deserves to be understood as a character before she is understood as a comedy device, because the show at its best gave her real moments and real depth, and at its worst used her as a target in ways that went further than satire and landed somewhere more uncomfortable. Meg in the early seasons was designed as the ordinary member of an extraordinary family. That is the original, and in many ways most interesting version of her. Not ugly, not deserving of abuse, not defined by her suffering, just a girl who is somewhat boring compared to the chaos around her, who wants friends and social acceptance, and to feel like her family notices her in a positive way. These are extremely human desires, and in those early seasons the show treated them with a kind of empathetic comedy that recognized the universality of feeling overlooked. She was unpopular at James Woods Regional High School, later renamed Adam West High, after the late actor who voiced Mayor Adam West on the show and who passed away in 2017. The school name itself is a piece of show lore that rewards attention. James Woods, the real-life actor who grew up in Warwick, Rhode Island, became both a recurring character on the show and eventually a complicated piece of its history, and the school named after him became the site of enough of Meg's storylines to qualify as a real character location with its own identity. Chris Griffin, the middle child, voiced by Seth Green, is a character who rewards the kind of close reading that the show's comedy does not always invite. Chris is drawn as slightly dim, awkward, heavy-set in the way of a teenage boy who hasn't quite grown into his body yet, and deeply good-natured. His defining characteristic is a kind of cheerful confusion about most things he is not disturbed by his lack of understanding, which is itself a kind of character statement. Chris doesn't agonize. Chris just exists, pleasantly, in whatever situation he finds himself in. But there are episodes that break from that surface reading and give Chris unexpected depth. He has a talent for art that shows up periodically, and it is treated by the show as genuine rather than as a punchline. There is something in Chris that a good teacher or the right encouragement could have developed into something real, and the show hints at this without always following through. He is a teenager in the background of a story that is mostly about adults, and that placement means his character often gets less development than he deserves, but what development he does receive tends to be warmer and more earnest than the main characters usually get. Outside the Griffin family but essential to the world of the show are the four men of Spooner Street and its immediate vicinity. Glenn Quagmire is Peter's next-door neighbor, an airline pilot, a man whom Seth MacFarlane has described as caught in a permanent Rat Pack fantasy, built from the anachronistic party animal archetype of the 1950s and deployed into the modern world where that archetype does not go unexamined. His catchphrase, "Giggity giggity," is one of the most recognizable sounds in animated television history. His surname, Quagmire, was apparently suggested by a college acquaintance of MacFarlane's and has a Polish ancestry in the show's lore, Quagelczek or Quageleczek, shortened by immigration or preference or practical necessity. Quagmire is more complicated than his primary gimmick suggests, and the show knows this. He has genuine warmth for his friends. He has a sister whose storyline is one of the show's more quietly serious efforts. He has moments of real vulnerability that appear when the comedy is turned down enough for them to be heard. His housemate arrangement and his personal history have both been given detail over the years that make him feel like a person who took a wrong turn somewhere and has been doubling down on it ever since, which is a description that fits a lot of real people, and is perhaps why Quagmire has remained popular even when the show could not always figure out what to do with him. Joe Swanson is the neighbor across the street, a detective with the Spooner Street Police Department who was paralyzed by a criminal during a Christmas confrontation years before the show's timeline begins. Patrick Warburton's voice work as Joe is one of the show's most consistent pleasures. Warburton plays Joe with a gruff confidence that never quite masks the strain of his situation, and the best Joe episodes are the ones that acknowledge that strain honestly, rather than just using his disability as a visual joke. Joe's marriage to Bonnie, his complicated relationship with his son Kevin, and his friendship with Peter are all threads that the show has returned to with varying levels of care, but the character at his core, the tough, capable, dignified man navigating a life that requires constant extra effort, is genuinely well constructed. Cleveland Brown, originally voiced by Mike Henry and now voiced by Arif Zahir, is the calm in the storm. His defining trait in those early seasons was a patience and gentleness that served as the adult check on the group's worst impulses. Not that the check was always effective, but it was consistently present. Cleveland's famous bathtub falls, which became a running gag, are a perfect example of Family Guy's absurdist logic. The same thing happening to the same person in the same way, because the show liked the shape of the joke and kept returning to it. Cleveland later got his own spin-off in 2009, The Cleveland Show, which moved him out of Spooner Street and into Stool Bend, Virginia with a new family. Mayor Adam West, before his passing, was a recurring presence in the show that deserves specific mention as one of Family Guy's most consistently clever running jokes. Adam West voiced a character named Adam West, who was the mayor of the fictional town, drawing on his own real-world fame as the actor who played Batman on the 1960s television series, and the character was written as a man of spectacular creative eccentricity. Mayor West did things that made no sense in a way that suggested a man operating from an internal logic that was completely coherent to him and completely baffling to everyone else. His non-sequiturs and strange projects were delivered with the straight-faced sincerity of someone who did not consider any of it strange at all, and West performed this with a commitment and a specific comedic instinct that made the character genuinely funny even decades into the show's run. When West died in June of 2017, the show retired the character respectfully and renamed James Woods Regional High School after him. It was an act of genuine affection from a show toward a performer who had given it something irreplaceable, and it reflected the kind of warmth that Family Guy, when it remembers to, can deliver with real feeling. Section 6, The Town Itself, Breathing. The fictional city of Quahog sits in Newport County, Rhode Island, based primarily on Cranston, Rhode Island, with Rhode Island geography and culture woven throughout its DNA. A quahog is a type of hard-shelled clam, native to the Atlantic coast from Canada down through Florida, found particularly abundantly in the waters off Rhode Island's shoreline. Narragansett Bay, which cuts deep into Rhode Island's interior, has been a quahog fishing ground for centuries, And the clam is such a part of the state's identity that it shows up on menus, in place names, and in cultural shorthand throughout the region. Naming your fictional Rhode Island town after the state's emblematic clam is the kind of place-specific joke that people from the area would understand immediately, and that everyone else would need exactly one line of explanation. To get, the population of the fictional city is established at around 100,000, which puts it in the range of a medium-sized New England city, not Providence, which is much larger, but not a small town either. It has the infrastructure of a real American municipality. A city hall, a police station, a hospital, a high school, several bars, a mall, a news station, a library, and the kind of miscellaneous civic architecture that cities accumulate over decades without anyone quite planning them. The show has added to this infrastructure over the years as episodes required, which means Quahog has by now the slightly improvised quality of a city that grew organically rather than being designed. The Pawtucket Patriot Brewery is one of the show's most important recurring locations, and it deserves careful attention because it is not just a workplace. It is a world-building element that connects the fictional town to real Rhode Island geography and culture in a specific way. Narragansett beer is the actual brewery most closely associated with Rhode Island's drinking culture. It brewed continuously in Cranston for decades, closed, and then was revived as a regional craft brand. The Pawtucket Patriot Brewery is clearly a riff on this, and on the Hasbro Toy Company connection, and it places Peter in a workplace that is quintessentially Rhode Island in its blue-collar, product of the region identity. Peter's work at the brewery as a shipping clerk is not glamorous. It does not require the skills that Peter does not have, and does not reward the ambitions that Peter also does not have. It is a job that pays him enough to keep the house, keep the refrigerator stocked, and keep a tab at the Drunken Clam. And for Peter Griffin, that is precisely enough. He has no career ambitions. He has no plans for advancement. He goes to work because that is what you do, and then he comes home or goes to the bar because those are the things that actually matter to him. The Drunken Clam is the gravitational center of Peter's social life. It is a bar on a main commercial street in the fictional town, with a neon sign shaped like a clam outside, and the interior atmosphere of every neighborhood bar that has been in operation for 30 years. Dim lighting, worn bar stools, a jukebox that has been on the same rotation since 2003, and the particular smell of a place where a lot of people have had a lot of drinks, and the carpet has absorbed some of the emotional residue of all those evenings. It is the kind of bar where the bartender knows what you are going to order before you sit down, where there are a few regular tables that belong to the same people every night by unspoken agreement, and where the conversation can be absolutely meaningless and still somehow feel important because of who you are having it with. Peter, Quagmire, Joe, and Cleveland own a table at the Drunken Clam in the way that men of a certain age and temperament own tables at places like this. Not literally they pay their bills, they tip adequately, but in the way of long habitual presence. That table is theirs. The booth in the back left, by the wall, with enough room for four and a clear line of sight to the door and the television above the bar. They have been sitting at that table through marriages and divorces, through career changes and physical injuries, through the various disasters that Peter periodically inflicts on the surrounding area. The table is the one constant. The bar has hosted some of the show's most memorable scenes, precisely because it is the place where the men of Spooner Street speak freely. Free from the supervision of wives, free from the complications of parenting, free from work and obligation. The conversations that happen at that table range from the profound rare, but present to the spectacularly stupid, with most of them landing somewhere in the territory of pleasantly aimless. That is the function of places like the Drunken Clam. Not to advance anything, but to provide a space where time passes without urgency. James Woods Regional High School, Adam West High in more recent seasons, is the other major recurring location that gives the show's world its texture. The school is named in the earlier seasons after the actor James Woods, who grew up in Warwick, Rhode Island. Woods appeared on the show multiple times as a version of himself, and the school bearing his name is one of those small pieces of world building that connects the fictional town to real Rhode Island geography in a way that feels rooted rather than arbitrary. Meg, Chris, and various other young characters spend significant portions of their lives in that building, and it has all the features of an American public high school. Lockers, cafeterias, a gymnasium for events and humiliations, classrooms where the authority of teachers and the indifference of students exist in permanent negotiation. The school's population has included characters designed primarily as antagonists for Meg Connie D'Amico, the popular girl who functions as the show's delivery vehicle for social cruelty, and characters who pass through more briefly as guest star opportunities. The town also has Goldman's Pharmacy, run by Mort Goldman and his family. Mort is a character who exists primarily at the edges of the main narrative, but who appears frequently enough to have accumulated a genuine personality. He is anxious, he is well-meaning, he is Jewish in a way the show sometimes handles with more care than other demographic shorthand, and sometimes handles less carefully. His pharmacy is the kind of neighborhood pharmacy that is also slightly a community gathering point, the place you go for medicine and end up staying for conversation. There is a stop-end shop and a Quahog Mall and a Quahog Arena and various restaurants that come and go depending on what the episode needs. The city breathes because the show never treated it as a static backdrop. New buildings appear when plots require them. Old ones get referenced when the joke needs the history. The geography is not precisely consistent. The relative positions of the bar and the house and the school shift depending on which establishing shot the animators need, but the feel of the place is consistent. You could navigate Quahog by feel even if the specific distances don't quite add up. The Griffin's neighborhood, Spooner Street specifically, has a particular quality in the early seasons that is worth naming. It feels like an actual neighborhood. The houses are different from each other, but similar enough to be coherent. The front yards are the right size. The street has the right amount of traffic enough to be a real street, not enough to be a commercial artery. When characters walk from one house to another, it has the distance and the casual quality of actually crossing the street to visit a neighbor, which is something that people in neighborhoods actually do. That neighborhood quality is part of what the show did well in its early years, and part of what sustained the warmth of those episodes. The fictional town of Quahog, at its best, felt inhabited. Not just by the main characters, but by the background presences, the people at the bar who are not named characters, the teachers at the school who appear for a scene and then recede, the postal workers and store clerks and municipal employees who populate any real city. Quahog had those people in the background in a way that made the world feel full rather than empty, and that fullness was part of what made spending time in it feel like a pleasure rather than a chore. Section 7. The Golden Episodes. A tour through the best. There are episodes of Family Guy that function as complete artistic statements. Episodes where every element, the writing, the animation, the character work, the pacing comes together in a way that makes you understand exactly why the show mattered so much to so many people. Tonight we are going to tour several of those episodes, slowly, treating each one as a place worth visiting rather than a plot to be summarized. The very first episode, Death Has a Shadow, is both a promise and a delivery. It establishes the show's premise with confidence and efficiency. Peter gets fired from his job for appearing drunk at work, applies for welfare to replace his income, fraudulently claims the maximum amount, and the various consequences of this ripple outward in the specific cascade of bad decisions that would define Peter's character for the next quarter century. The opening sequence establishes the family, the house, the neighborhood, the tone. The first cutaway Peter comparing the current situation to a previous ridiculous situation arrives within the first few minutes and establishes the structural grammar of the show immediately. What the pilot does that deserves specific credit is that it makes you like these people quickly. Peter is ridiculous but warm. Lois is exasperated but present. Brian is dry but affectionate. Stewie is menacing but funny. Meg and Chris are sketched lightly but with enough specificity to suggest fuller characters who will arrive later. The show knew who its characters were from the beginning, and it showed you that knowledge immediately. Road to Rhode Island is the episode that launched an entire category of Family Guy storytelling. Season 2, Episode 13, directed by Dan Povenmire, written by Gary Janetti. Brian and Stewie are traveling back from Palm Springs, where Stewie has been visiting his grandparents. Brian misses the flight. The two of them have to make their way home by land, across the country, and the structure of that journey gives the show room to develop the Brian and Stewie dynamic in ways that previous episodes had not explored. It also features the first major musical number for the pairing, a song that breaks out on a bus, performed with the kind of vocal commitment that was not what you expected from a cartoon in 2000. And it established the template that the Road 2 episodes would follow for years afterward. The Road to episodes are modeled loosely on the Bob Hope and Bing Crosby road pictures of the 1940s and 1950s film comedies that sent the two stars on journeys to various exotic locations where they would bicker, sing, and get into increasingly improbable situations. The show transplanted this structure into its own world, sending Brian and Stewie to Europe, to Germany in wartime, to the multiverse, to North Pole, to India, and elsewhere. Each Road to episode has its own special title cards, its own musical sequences, and the specific chemistry of two characters who are genuinely good company for each other even when they are ostensibly in conflict. Road to Europe from Season 3 is particularly worth visiting. Brian and Stewie end up stranded in Saudi Arabia and have to make their way back to Quahog through Europe, which gives the show an opportunity to move through multiple cultural contexts and find comedy in each of them. The episode is also notable for one of the show's most genuinely bizarre and fully committed extended gags. Peter and Lois have a subplot involving a Kiss fan club that becomes its own small narrative universe, and the contrast between the two storylines is itself a structural comedy move. Brian and Stewie, the Season 8 episode set entirely in the bank vault, is the peak of what the show could achieve when it gave itself space and permission. The premise is simple. The two characters are accidentally locked in overnight and have to wait until morning. That's it. That is the entire scenario. What happens within it is not plot-driven in any conventional sense, it is character-driven, in the way that stage plays are character-driven, by conversation and revelation, and the gradual exposure of inner lives. The gun in the safety deposit box. Brian revealing that he has thought about not continuing. Stewie's response to that revelation, delivered in the specific idiom of a character who communicates emotion through a vocabulary of superiority and condescension, but whose actual feeling in that moment is raw and direct. The episode ends with both characters in a slightly different place than they started, not transformed by the night, but altered. That is realistic emotional storytelling dressed in cartoon clothes. And it is one of the reasons Family Guy at its best occupies a category that other animated comedies don't quite reach. The episode I Never Met the Dead Man, from Season 1, is a small masterpiece of the show's early style. Peter loses his driver's license because he crashes the family car into a television transmission tower, knocking out TV reception across the town, and the episode uses this premise to explore what Peter is without television, which turns out to be a man of some unsuspected depth and outdoors enthusiasm. The show makes a genuine joke out of the idea that television has been functioning as a substitute for real engagement with the world, and it does so with enough warmth that the critique doesn't feel mean-spirited. The courtship of Stewie's father from Season 4 gives Peter and Stewie a genuine father-son adventure that lets both characters be their best selves simultaneously. Peter trying to bond with Stewie while Stewie pursues what he actually wants, which in this period was still at least partially world domination, created episodes where the comedy came from the mismatch between their interpretations of the same activities. North by North Quahog, the Season 4 premiere, brought the show back from its 3-year absence with an episode that felt like a statement of confidence. Peter and Lois reignite their relationship by escaping for a romantic weekend, and the show managed to be funny and warm and genuinely celebratory of the marriage at the center of its family. For a show returning from cancellation, it was a reminder that the Griffin marriage was not just a comedy premise, but a real relationship with a real emotional weight. Stewie kills Lois and Lois kills Stewie, the Season 6 two-parter, has already been discussed in the Stewie section, but it deserves mention here as well because it is one of the most ambitious things the show ever attempted structurally. 2 episodes, a continuous narrative, a genuine commitment to stakes and consequence before the reset pulled everything back. In television, the willingness to let things actually happen to let a story go somewhere real is rarer than it should be. For 2 episodes, Family Guy went somewhere real. The episode called Petarded is one of the early show's funniest pure comedies. Peter takes a version of the game Trivial Pursuit designed for children and wins, which leads him to believe he is a genius. Various tests then reveal that Peter is actually, in a technical diagnostic sense, intellectually disabled, and the episode explores the comedy and the unexpected consequences of this classification with a generosity that prevented it from being cruel. Peter does not become sad about this discovery. He becomes strategic about its uses, which is such a Peter thing to do that the episode feels like a perfect character study dressed as a comedy. Each of these episodes and the many others like them shared something in common. the sense that the writers cared about the characters they were writing. Not in a simple or sentimental way, but in the way that comes through in the details, the specific words chosen for a Brian line, the way a Stewie speech builds, the timing of a Peter physical gag, the small moment of warmth at the end of an episode that was otherwise relentless comedy. That care is what makes these episodes worth visiting on quiet nights, worth settling into, worth letting wash over you until sleep finds its way in. Section 8. The Cutaway Universe. There is a moment in almost every Family Guy episode, or at least in the version of Family Guy that most people think of when they think of the show, where a character begins a sentence with, "This is worse than," and then time and space fold. The main story pauses, and the screen opens up into a completely different world. A pirate ship in the 1700s, a supermarket in the 1950s, a waiting room in heaven, an obscure celebrity's living room in an unspecified decade, the back of a limousine, a conference room on the moon. These worlds last anywhere from a few seconds to a full minute, and then they close, and the characters snap back to whatever they were doing, and the sentence that started the cutaway is either completed or forgotten depending on what the episode needs. This is the cutaway gag, and it is the most distinctive structural feature in Family Guy's history. Every television show has a style, a grammar, a set of moves that it makes repeatedly. Family Guy's grammar is built around these interruptions, these small, alternate universes that open up and close within the main narrative. Understanding them fully requires understanding not just what they do on the surface deliver jokes, but what they imply about the show's relationship with its own world and with storytelling conventions generally. The cutaway is based on a principle of permission. The show's world is real enough to establish stakes, but loose enough to be interrupted at any moment by a completely different world. Characters make references to their pasts, to things they've heard about, to imagined scenarios, and the show honors those references by literally showing them, not explaining them, not summarizing them, showing them, fully staged, animated, voiced, scored. Every throwaway reference is given a world. This is an expensive way to tell jokes, in terms of production resources, because every cutaway requires animation work for a scene that might last 15 seconds and will never appear again. In the early seasons, when the cutaways were shorter and more deliberately chosen, this investment paid off consistently. The cutaway gag functioned as a reward for attention. You were watching the main story, you were following the characters, and then you got a bonus, a small gift from the writers that enriched the episode without distracting from it. The best cutaway gags work by establishing a premise, letting it breathe for exactly the right amount of time, and then closing before it overstays its welcome. The length of a cutaway is itself a comedy decision. Too short and you don't get the joke fully. Too long and the joke collapses under its own weight. The most memorable cutaways from the early seasons have a rhythm that is almost musical. They hit the beat, hold for a moment, and release. You can feel when a cutaway has found its length correctly, just as you can feel when it has not. Some cutaways function as pure absurdist scenarios with no narrative connection to what came before them. Peter will say the word elephant, and the show will cut to an elephant in a tuxedo at a formal dinner, and the only connection is the word itself. These work because they honor the logic of free association. The mind moves from one thing to another by odd and private paths, and the cutaway gag externalizes that process, makes it visible and shareable. Other cutaways are references. A character mentions something specific, a historical event, a celebrity, a cultural artifact, and the show dramatizes it. These were particularly effective in the early seasons when the pop culture references were more specific and more surprising. A well-chosen reference from an obscure piece of 1970s television lands differently than a reference to something everyone has already seen 100 times, and the writing room's catholicity of taste in those early seasons gave them access to a wide range of material that felt genuinely surprising. The Conway-Twitty cutaways deserve specific mention as the extreme end of what the format could become when it stopped serving comedy and started replacing it. Conway-Twitty was a country singer, enormously successful in the 1970s and 1980s, with a catalog of honky-tonk ballads that are genuine examples of the form. The show began periodically cutting away from its main narrative to show an unedited performance by Conway-Twitty, running the full length of a song, with no punchline, no twist, no comedic frame beyond the fact that it was there instead of the actual episode. The first time, this was genuinely unexpected and therefore genuinely funny. The joke was the audacity of the substitution, putting a real country song where a comedy scene should be, daring the audience to keep watching, playing on the gap between expectation and delivery. The second time, it was funny in the way that callbacks to jokes are sometimes funny. By the fifth and sixth time, it had transformed from joke into symbol, a shorthand for the critics and disillusioned fans who felt that the show's later seasons were offering nothing rather than something, and had found a way to make nothing look like a creative choice. But the cutaway format, divorced from its excesses, is genuinely interesting as a comedy structure. It is a format that trusts the audience to hold multiple contexts simultaneously, to step out of the main story and into a completely different world, and then step back, without losing the thread of either. It is a format that treats the audience's attention as flexible rather than fragile. In its best form, it creates a kind of comedic density, more jokes per minute than almost any other format, while also providing the release valve of regular interruptions that prevent any single storyline from feeling too heavy. The cutaway also created a specific internet culture around the show. When YouTube launched in 2005, the same year Family Guy returned from cancellation, the format of the cutaway gag was perfectly suited to short-form video sharing. A 30-second cutaway, pulled from its episode context, could stand alone completely. It had a beginning, a middle, and an end. It required no prior knowledge of the episode or the season. You could share it with someone who had never watched Family Guy, and it would work on its own terms. This made Family Guy one of the first television shows to develop a genuine clip culture, a library of moments that circulated online independently of the episodes they came from. The cutaway gag is, ultimately, a way of world-building through implication. Every cutaway implies a universe in which the scenario depicted actually happened. In the world of Family Guy, every ridiculous thing that characters reference as having happened actually happened. Peter has done all the things he references in setup lines. Brian has been in all the situations he compares other situations to. Stewie has been to all the places his schemes have taken him. The cutaways are glimpses into a history that is vast and mostly invisible, a history of which the episodes themselves are only a small portion. That is a genuinely interesting creative premise, and it gives the show's world a density that is part of why spending time in it tonight feels comfortable and full rather than thin and arbitrary. The world of Quahog has a history that you can feel even when you cannot see it, because you have seen enough cutaway glimpses to know that history is real. Section 9, Songs in the Night, Seth's Other Voice. There is a version of Seth MacFarlane's career in which he became a professional singer and never made a television show. He has said as much in interviews that when he graduated from the Rhode Island School of Design, he was considering graduate school for musical theater, and he had actually been admitted to the Boston Conservatory of Music's graduate program. He had the offer. He was planning to go. And then the offer came from Hanna-Barbera to develop an animated short, and he made the other choice. But the musical identity never left. It went into the show instead, which is how Family Guy became one of the most musically ambitious animated comedies in television history, hiding its musical ambition inside episodes that would otherwise be described primarily as anarchic comedies about a buffoonish Rhode Island family. Seth MacFarlane has said, in several interviews, that he discovered early in Family Guy's production that an orchestra is like crack his words. Not quite, but the spirit of it was there. Once he started using full orchestral arrangements for musical numbers in the show, he found it addictive. The richness of a real orchestra under a comedic song lyric created a contrast that he found endlessly interesting, because the gap between the sophistication of the music and the absurdity of the content was itself a kind of joke. The orchestra plays beautifully. What it's playing is Stewie's plans for world domination, set to a Sondheim-inflected melody. The beauty and the absurdity coexist without canceling each other out. MacFarlane's singing voice, deployed through Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Quagmire, is a real instrument. He studied with Lee and Sally Sweetland, the same coaches who worked with Sinatra, who apparently instructed with a particular emphasis on dental visibility, the exposed tooth technique that you can see in old photographs of Sinatra performing, which brightens the whole vocal quality. MacFarlane absorbed this technique and it transformed what he could do vocally. Peter Griffin's occasional musical moments have a warmth that is not accidental. Brian's quieter singing has a melancholy precision. Stewie's theatrical numbers are performed with a commitment to musical theater conventions that pays off because the form is honored even while the content satirizes it. The theme song itself, written by Walter Murphy, who was also the composer of the disco-era instrumental, A fifth of Beethoven is a piece of musical craft that often gets overlooked because it sounds so effortlessly right for the show. It is a full orchestral number with a big band sensibility, sweeping and optimistic, the kind of theme that signals a show confident in itself. It has the warmth of a 1950s television theme filtered through a contemporary arrangement, and it creates an expectation of a certain kind of American family comedy that the show then immediately undercuts in every possible direction. The gap between the cheerful theme and the chaos that follows is itself part of the show's identity. The Road to Rhode Island song, sung by Brian and Stewie on a bus somewhere in the American Midwest, is the template for the musical numbers that would follow in the Road 2 episodes. It is a comedy song. Technically, it is set to a parody of the old-time standard Way Down Yonder in New Orleans, and its lyrics are about the journey they are on, but it is performed with the sincerity of a real production number. The harmony is real. The voices are placed correctly. The comedy comes through the content, not through a lack of commitment to the musicality. A musical number in Family Guy lands when the show treats it like a real number rather than a parody of a number. This is a distinction that gets lost in a lot of comedies that attempt musical sequences. They play the comedy by making the musicality bad, winking at the audience about the fact that they are aware this is a joke. Family Guy's best musical moments do the opposite. They play the musicality straight and let the comedy come from the text and the context rather than from undercutting the form. Stewie performing a full-length number about his emotions towards someone in his life, with a full pit orchestra and correct staging, is funnier than if the music were deliberately bad because the commitment to quality is itself the joke's second layer. McFarlane released his first solo album, Music is Better Than Words, in 2011, working with orchestras and arrangers to record standards from the Great American Songbook in the manner of the old Hollywood vocal records Sinatra, Tony Bennett, Dean Martin. The album was reviewed with genuine respect by music critics who had expected novelty and found something more serious. He performed at Carnegie Hall. He performed at the Royal Albert Hall. He hosted the Academy Awards and opened the ceremony with a musical number. These were not the activities of a person doing music as a side project. They were the activities of a person who had split himself between two callings and was trying to honor both of them. That musical identity flows back into the show in ways that are felt even when they are not consciously noticed. The score under an emotional scene has a particular quality when it has been composed by someone who loves music the way McFarlane loves music. The orchestration of the theme song is too good to have come from someone who was not paying close attention to the musical details. The specific way that Stewie's theatrical voice is calibrated, the precision of the diction, the placement of the vowels, the breath control that is evident even in a cartoon character's vocal performance speaks to a creator for whom these details are not ornamental but essential. Family Guy, when you include all of its musical content, has produced a catalog of original songs that spans multiple genres and tonal registers. There are comedy songs, ballads, show tunes, folk songs, parody songs, original numbers that feel like genuine contributions to their respective forms rather than pastiches of them. Most television shows have a theme and some incidental music. Family Guy has a musical identity, and that identity is part of what gives the world of the show its particular richness and warmth. When you are watching a Family Guy episode at 2 in the morning and a character breaks into song, not a parody, not a joke song, but a real song with real musicality, it produces a feeling that is distinct from the surrounding comedy. It is a moment of genuine beauty in a world that is primarily comedic, and the contrast between those two modes is not a failure of consistency, it is a feature. It is the show saying, briefly, that beauty is possible here too, that the world of the Griffins, for all its chaos and all its ridiculous edges, contains music. Let that settle for a moment. The house on Spooner Street, late at night, everyone asleep, the television off, and somewhere in that quiet, a piece of music playing softly, the particular warmth of an orchestra in a room, the kind of sound that makes the dark feel less absolute. Section 10, Deeper into the Lore, details the show rewards. Every long-running world builds up a sediment of detail over time. The specific details accumulate, not all of them planned, not all of them consistent, but together creating a texture that rewards the kind of close attention that rewatching provides. Family Guy has this quality. The details of its world, laid down across more than 400 episodes, have created a lore that has its own internal logic and its own pleasures. Peter Griffin's middle name is Löwenbräu, which is a brand of German beer. His full name is Peter Lovenbrough Griffin Sr., which means there is a junior somewhere, a potential heir to the Griffin name, and also means that Francis Griffin, his Catholic Irish-American adoptive father, gave his son a middle name after a German beer brand, which implies a level of alcohol appreciation in the Griffin family that goes back at least one generation. Peter was born in Mexico. This has been established and then occasionally revisited in the show's lore, and it has implications for his legal status that the show has played with over the years. His biological father, Mickey McFinnigan, is Irish, which means Peter is the son of two nationalities that are primarily not American, raised in America by an Irish Catholic adoptive father, presenting as about as New England American as a person can be, while having the actual ethnic DNA of someone who should theoretically sound like a Dublin dockworker. This is both a comedy piece and a character piece, because it suggests that identity is not about origin but about environment and habit, which is something Peter embodies completely unconsciously. Stewie's full name is Stuart Gilligan Griffin. The Gilligan is a reference to Gilligan's Island, the 1960s television comedy series that MacFarlane has cited as an influence. Gilligan's Island was, like Family Guy, built around a small ensemble of people in an absurd situation, and it operated on a logic of perpetual stasis. The castaways kept ending up back on the island, their escapes forever thwarted, in a way that prefigures the reset-button storytelling that Family Guy would later be criticized for. The middle name is an in-joke that places Stewie within a specific lineage of American television comedy. Brian's car in the later seasons is a Prius. His prior car history is not fully established. His writing career includes the novel he never finishes in the early seasons and the self-help book he publishes in Season 9, called Wish It, Want It, Do It. The self-help book is a joke about the self-help industry, obviously, but it is also a character piece. Brian writes a book that is the opposite of who he is and who he aspires to be, a book that rewards positive thinking rather than melancholy intelligence, and it becomes a bestseller. The comedy of Brian's response to this success is dark and consistent with who he had become by that point in the series. The evil monkey who lives in Chris's closet is one of the show's most beloved recurring background jokes. For years, the evil monkey would appear in Chris's closet, pointing at him with one finger while making a frightening face, and Chris would react with appropriate terror. The joke ran for a long time on pure absurdism. Why is there an evil monkey in Chris's closet? What has the monkey done that qualifies as evil? When was the monkey installed? None of these questions were answered, because the joke worked on the basis of established surrealism rather than explanation. Eventually, the show gave the evil monkey a backstory, which revealed that the monkey was not actually evil at all, but was pointing because he was sad about his failed marriage, and what Chris had interpreted as a threatening gesture was the expression of grief. This was both funny and a little bit touching, because it recontextualized every previous appearance of the monkey and turned what had been pure comedy into something with an emotional dimension. The evil monkey, properly understood, is a creature in pain who has been expressing his pain in the only way available to him, and the child in the closet has been misreading him for years. That is a complete small story embedded in a recurring visual gag, and it is the kind of thing that Family Guy's lore does better than it is given credit for. The chicken Ernie the giant chicken, already discussed in the Peter section, has his own backstory that the show has revealed in fragments over the years. He has a wife, he has a social life, he appears periodically in what seem to be entirely unrelated contexts before inevitably crossing Peter's path again. The specificity of his characterization, given that his primary function is to fight Peter in epic brawls, is itself a comedy move. The show has invested in Ernie as a character in order to make the absurdity of their conflict more resonant, because it is funnier to know that this creature has a life and a wife, and presumably concerns and goals, and that all of it gets disrupted every time he and Peter encounter each other. Mort Goldman's pharmacy is called Goldman's Pharmacy, and Mort runs it with the anxious efficiency of a man who takes his professional responsibilities very seriously while being personally unable to manage his anxiety about anything outside of those responsibilities. His son, Neil Goldman, was designed as Meg's devoted, unrequited pursuer, a character who loved Meg with the intensity that Meg wished she received from anywhere, which the show uses as comedy, but which also carries a specific irony that the show sometimes acknowledged and sometimes left alone. Mayor Adam West, the character, not the man, owned a cat in one episode that he dressed up as himself. He once attempted to turn the town's harbor into a personal swimming pool. He maintained a collection of gold-painted items simply because he liked the color. He declared war on the decimal system. He hired people to follow him around and say his name in an impressed tone when he walked into rooms. He is the kind of mayor that a city in a surreal, animated world deserves. And Adam West's performance of the character was so perfectly calibrated, always played straight, always fully committed to the internal logic of whatever the character was doing, that it became one of the show's most reliable sources of a specific kind of pleasure. The show's world also has a news channel, Quahog 5 News, staffed by Tom Tucker and Diane Simmons as anchors, and Trisha Takanawa as a field reporter. These characters are parodies of local news archetypes so precise that they feel like observations rather than inventions. Tom Tucker's pomposity, Diane Simmons's barely contained ambition, Trisha Takanawa's deadpan field reporting, these are distillations of behaviors that exist in every local news operation, in every mid-sized American city, and the show's familiarity with those behaviors gives the parody its accuracy. The Griffin family dog before Brian, there are brief references to this in the show's history, was named Biscuit, who died before the events of the series. The choice to name the family dog Biscuit, a name with the warmth and ordinariness of an actual family dog name, and then to replace that dog with Brian, who is the opposite of ordinary in every possible way, is a character choice that speaks to the specificity of the Griffin situation. They had a normal dog, and now they have a dog who orders martinis and has opinions about Hemingway. Stewie's room contains a portrait of himself in a general's uniform. It is visible in the background of several early episodes, and it is a perfect piece of set design, understated, consistent, revealing. The portrait says everything about Stewie's self-image that his speeches say more explicitly. He is a 1-year-old baby who considers himself general material. The portrait is hanging in his nursery. These two facts coexist completely naturally in the world of Family Guy, and they are funnier for the naturalness with which they coexist. The town's sports teams include the Quahog Clams, which is the most Rhode Island possible team name, and which the show uses periodically when Peter needs a professional sports context for a storyline. The brewery sponsors various community events. There is a local community theater where various characters have performed. There is a church that the Griffin family attends with the casual inconsistency of a family whose faith is real, but whose practice is negotiable. These details, the ones that reward the kind of paying attention you do when you are watching something late at night, when you are close to sleep but not quite there, when your attention is soft and receptive rather than active and critical, are the sediment of a world that has been building for over 25 years. They are not all consistent with each other. Some of them were established and then forgotten. Some were established and then contradicted, but together they create the feeling of a world with a history, a world that has been lived in, a world that contains more than it ever explicitly shows you. That feeling, the feeling that a fictional place is real enough to have unexplored corners, unexplained details, ongoing lives that the camera doesn't always follow, is the feeling that separates the worlds you want to visit again from the ones you have seen enough of. Quahog, for all its inconsistencies and all the ways the show has sometimes mishandled it, is a world you want to visit again. Tonight it is 11 p.m. on Spooner Street. The Drunken Clam closed an hour ago. Peter is asleep on the couch with the television on, because that is where he falls asleep most nights. Lois turned off the lights in the kitchen and went upstairs. Stewie is in his crib, which he never actually uses for sleeping, doing calculations in the dark. Brian is at the kitchen table with a glass of something he does not need, and a notebook he has not written in yet tonight. The notebook is open to a blank page that has been open to a blank page for 3 weeks. The pen is there. The intention is there. The words are not yet there, but they could come tonight. They might come tonight. Section 11. What Late Night and Family Guy share. There is a reason that Family Guy and Late Night have always found each other. The show premiered at 8:30 p.m. in its original run, a time slot that assumed a family audience, a broad audience, a general audience. And it was never quite that. It was always, somehow, more suited to the specific quiet of late watching the hour when the day has let you go and you are not yet asleep, when the usual filters are down and you are willing to receive things you might resist during more defended hours. Adult Swim understood this. When Cartoon Network's late-night adult programming block picked up the reruns of Family Guy in April of 2003, they placed them in the rotation that ran from 11 p.m. through the early morning, and the audience that found the show, there was a specific kind of audience. Not families, not general households, night people. The people who are still awake at midnight and 1 a.m., and 2 a.m., not because they have to be, but because the night suits them, because the quiet of the late hours has a quality that daytime does not, a permission for a certain kind of relationship with a screen that the daytime does not allow. The show's ratings on Adult Swim were enormous. Not just good enormous. The block's viewership went up by 239% when Family Guy joined the rotation, which is a number that does not make sense until you understand that there was an audience that had been waiting for this show to be available in the right context, at the right hour, in the right spirit. Those late-night reruns did not just sustain Family Guy's audience between seasons, they created the mythology of the show. They turned it from a canceled program into a cultural institution, from something people used to watch into something people discovered and then became devoted to. There is a specific way that late-night television watching works, and it is the way that this video is designed for. The attention is not sharp, it is not critical. It is softer, more receptive, less inclined toward analysis and more inclined toward absorption. The jokes land differently when you are horizontal and comfortable. The emotional moments hit different when your defenses are low. The familiarity of a world you know well becomes particularly comforting when the night outside is quiet and the day is fully over. Family Guy at 2 a.m. is a different experience than Family Guy at 8 p.m. At 8 p.m. you are watching it. At 2 a.m. it is watching you back, gently, without demands. The cutaways flow past like images in a dream that has a logic you don't need to articulate. The characters say things that are funny and then say other things, and the episode continues, and at some point you realize you have been watching for 2 hours, and 3 episodes have passed and the room is darker than it was when you started. That is the specific late-night quality of Family Guy, and it is the quality that this video is trying to give you slowly, comfortably, in the voice of someone who is not in a hurry to get anywhere, who is as happy sitting here in the quiet of this fictional Rhode Island neighborhood as you are. The world of Quahog at this hour is very still. Spooner Street has no traffic. The Drunken Clam's neon sign is off. The sky over the Atlantic, a short drive east from the fictional town, has the particular blue-black of a clear night over ocean, the stars very close, the horizon very clean. Section 12. Returning Characters and Recurring Worlds. The world of the show has been populated, over its many seasons, by characters who entered for one episode and never quite left. Some of them became recurring presences. Some of them became near-permanent fixtures. And some of them appeared only once but left an impression so specific that they are part of the lore even without multiple appearances. Mort Goldman's son Neil, already mentioned, is a specific kind of character that the show deployed with some frequency, the devoted, hopeful person who loves someone who will never love them back. Neil's devotion to Meg has a quality that the show sometimes treated as simply creepy comedy and sometimes treated with more complexity, recognizing that the joke was also a story about a person who genuinely felt something and had nowhere to put it. Consuela, the Griffin family's cleaning woman, is a character built almost entirely on a language barrier gag. She says no, no, no in response to most instructions, and the comedy comes from her impassive resistance to whatever the Griffins need done. It is a gag that the show returned to because it was consistent, and because the specific delivery of the no, no, no had its own comedic rhythm. Whether the character became more than a gag in any meaningful sense is debatable. She is one of the show's most persistent recurring non-main characters primarily on the strength of a single comedic trait. Bonnie Swanson, Joe's wife, is a character who spent most of the early seasons in a state of permanent pregnancy that became one of the show's longest-running background jokes. Bonnie was pregnant for years in showtime and in real broadcast time, and the show used this periodically as a visual gag without ever quite committing to the delivery. When Bonnie eventually did give birth, the show had to address the character's existence in a new, non-pregnant form, which opened up storylines about her marriage and her identity that the character had not previously had room for. Stewie's nemesis in several episodes is a character named Bertram, who is effectively another evil genius baby Stewie's sperm bank sibling, conceived from the same donor, who grew up to challenge Stewie's supremacy in the area of infant world domination. The Bertram episodes are a specific genre of Family Guy, the ones that take the show's absurd premise and extend it logically, asking what would happen if there were someone else operating in Stewie's conceptual space. The answers are both funny and oddly satisfying, because the show commits to the internal logic of its own most ridiculous premise. The recurring segments that appear in later seasons, the Meg-focus episodes, the Chris-centered stories, the lowest-led narratives each have their own internal logic that rewards attention. When the show gives its secondary characters the center of the frame, it often reveals depths that the main character focus misses. A Meg episode, when the show is willing to write Meg as a real person rather than a target, can be surprisingly moving. A Chris episode, when the show commits to Chris's specific brand of guileless confusion rather than just using him as comic relief, has a warmth that is genuinely earned. The show has a recurring location that functions almost as a character itself, the Griffin's van, which appears in various states of maintenance and disrepair depending on what the episode needs it to do. The family van is the vehicle of family road trips, of Peter's various misguided excursions, and of the particular American tradition of automotive adventure that sits at the intersection of optimism and poor planning. When the Griffins get in the van, something is going to happen, and it will probably not go as intended, and that is the deal. Herbert the neighborhood old man, voiced by Mike Henry, is one of the show's more uncomfortable recurring characters when viewed through a contemporary lens, but in terms of craft, the voice work is immaculate. A thin, reedy voice with the specific texture of old age, deployed in service of a character whose motivations the show presents as clearly problematic, but whose comedy comes from the complete obliviousness of the people around him. Herbert is a character the show would probably not create today, and that tension between what the show once was comfortable doing and what it has since learned is itself a part of the history of Family Guy. The show's relationship with celebrity guest appearances is one of its distinguishing features. Unlike some animated shows that use celebrity voices primarily for the novelty of hearing famous people play animated versions of themselves, Family Guy has frequently used guest stars in more integrated ways. James Woods became a recurring character with an actual arc. Rush Limbaugh had a storyline. Hugh Laurie appeared as a doctor character that commented on the real-world House MD. These appearances worked best when the show gave the guests something genuinely comedic to do, rather than just using their presence as the joke itself. The ongoing joke about James Woods in particular deserves more attention than it usually gets. James Woods appears multiple times on the show as a cartoonish version of himself, vain, easily manipulated, prone to following trail of candy, aggressively litigious, and the relationship between Peter and James Woods is one of the show's weirdest and most sustained running threads. The episode called James Has a Bad Day features Woods trying to befriend Peter with such desperation that it becomes its own kind of commentary on celebrity loneliness, and the show played it with more emotional investment than you might expect from an animated gag about a real actor. Each of these recurring characters and situations adds sediment to the world of the show. The world becomes more textured with each layer. By now, after more than 25 years and more than 400 episodes, the world of Quahog is rich in the way that only long-running fictional worlds can be too full to hold in your head all at once, but instantly recognizable in any single moment, familiar in its specific way, the way that your own neighborhood is familiar, the way that a long-known face is familiar. Section 13. The show's strange immortality. Family Guy premiered on the 31st of January 1999. It was canceled twice by Fox, once in 2002 after its third season, and once briefly in 2000 during schedule shuffling. It was resurrected by Adult Swim reruns and DVD sales, returned in 2005, and has been running continuously since. As of 2025, it has been renewed through its 27th season, which will take it to the 2028 to 2029 television season. The show's 30th anniversary is approaching, and Fox and Disney have committed to celebrating it. These are numbers that do not have many equivalents in television history. The Simpsons is the obvious comparison, having run since 1989 and currently in its 36th season as of 2025. South Park has run since 1997. These three shows, The Simpsons, South Park, Family Guy, form an unusual triangle in the history of adult animated television. Three shows with different styles, different philosophies, different relationships with their own length and longevity, each of which has become a kind of institution by outlasting every reasonable expectation. Family Guy's longevity is strange because it has survived on different terms than the other two. The Simpsons has a cultural prestige that insulates it from some of the criticisms leveled at long-running shows. South Park has an active political and satirical project that gives it ongoing relevance. Family Guy has something different, a specific kind of warmth and accessibility, a world that people return to not primarily for its commentary or its cultural currency, but for the comfort of familiarity. The pleasure of a known world with known people doing recognizable things. The show's business model has evolved to match its longevity. It generates revenue from first-run broadcasts, cable reruns on Adult Swim and FXX and Comedy Central, streaming on Hulu, merchandise, video games, and the broader cultural footprint of a franchise that has been producing content for a quarter century. The direct-to-video film Stewie Griffin: The Untold Story, released in 2005, was an early example of extending the franchise beyond the television format. The forthcoming spin-off Stewie, announced as a 2-season order for Fox, with Stewie navigating a new preschool using his arsenal of fantastical devices and traveling through time and space to make every boring school day an adventure, extends the franchise into its next phase. That spin-off premise, Stewie at school, using the time machine, turning mundane situations into extraordinary ones, is in some ways a return to the original Stewie premise. The evil genius operating in the context of the constraints placed on him by age and circumstance, using intelligence and technology to push against those constraints. It suggests that whatever the show has become over the years, the original concept of Stewie Griffin, one of animation's genuinely original character inventions, still has material in it, still has worlds to explore. The show's strange immortality is in part a function of its accessibility. An episode of Family Guy does not require you to have seen the previous episode. The characters do not change in ways that accumulate into knowledge you need to decode the current story. You can start anywhere and follow immediately, which is an enormous advantage in a streaming world where audiences frequently enter television shows in the middle and require on-ramps. Family Guy is its own on-ramp, because every episode reestablishes the world quickly enough that new viewers are not lost. This accessibility is also part of why the show functions so well for this kind of late-night viewing. You are not tracking a complex serial narrative. You are not worried about missing information from 3 seasons ago. You are just in the world, in the house on Spooner Street, with these people doing their things, and the world is consistent enough to be familiar and varied enough to be interesting. That combination, consistency and variation, is what makes any world worth returning to, whether the world is fictional or real. Section 14, Into the Quiet Hours. It is very late now, or very early depending on how you count these things. The kind of hour where the difference between night and morning is ambiguous, where the darkness outside has that specific quality of being almost done, not lighter yet, but softer somehow, less absolute. The birds have not started yet. The traffic has not started yet. The world outside is in that particular suspension between its last exhale and its first breath of the new day. In the house on Spooner Street, everything is settled. The television in the living room is off or nearly off, because in the Griffin household the television is rarely all the way off. It is more often in that dim standby state where the screen has gone dark, but the power is still there, waiting. Peter is asleep in his chair, or on the couch, with the specific weight of a man who fell asleep mid-intention rather than by design. His head has tilted to one side. His breathing has the deep, unself-conscious quality of someone who has no anxiety about sleep because he has never developed the capacity to worry about things like sleep. Lois is upstairs, in their bedroom, in the specific organized peace that she maintains even while asleep. Her side of the bed has books on the nightstand, actual books, not just a book she means to read. She has been reading one of them slowly, a few pages at a time, for several months, and she is close to the end now. She will finish it this week. Meg's room is dark. Her room is most of the time dark, which is something the early seasons used to communicate her isolation and which the later seasons use differently. Tonight, in the version of her room that exists in the most generous reading of her character, there is a small lamp on somewhere, pointed at the ceiling, casting a soft circle of light that makes the room feel less empty. She has headphones on, which is how she sleeps most nights, with something playing, something filling the quiet that the house does not provide enough of when people are awake and the family dynamics are in motion. Chris's room has the comfortable disorder of a teenager who is not tormented by his environment. He sleeps deeply, on his back, with none of the signs of a person working through anything in the night. He will wake up tomorrow and be slightly confused about where the day went the day before, and then he will be fine. Stewie's nursery, with its whiteboard and its Rupert on the shelf, and its crib that is more furniture than sleeping location, is quiet in a way that is not quite trustworthy, because the quiet of Stewie's room has never been entirely separable from the possibility of planning. But tonight, in this version of the house, tonight Stewie is actually asleep. His breathing is the small, even breathing of a child, because regardless of everything else, he is 1 year old, and at 1 year old, the body has requirements that supersede even the most ambitious schemes. Rupert is on the shelf where he belongs. The whiteboard is covered with calculations that will be there in the morning. Brian is at the kitchen table, or was at the kitchen table, and at some point in the last hour, he made the decision unusual for him to go to bed. The notebook is closed. The pen is capped. The glass has been rinsed and turned upside down in the drying rack, which is the kind of small, unnecessary tidiness that a person does when they are trying to leave a day better than they found it. The kitchen is clean in the specific way of a kitchen where one person decided to care about it tonight. Outside, on Spooner Street, the pavement is dry. The maple trees that line the street have their leaves, moving slightly in the Atlantic air that comes this far inland at night. The Swanson house across the street has a porch light on, which is always on, because Joe keeps it on. The Drunken Clam sign is dark. The neighborhood is as quiet as a neighborhood in a city of 100,000 people can be in the middle of the night, which is very quiet but not silent. There is always the low background hum of a place that is alive, even when it is resting. This is the world of Family Guy at its most essential. Not the jokes, not the cutaways, not the outrage and the chaos and the cultural controversy that the show has periodically generated, just the world. The house, the street, the people inside, sleeping. The specific feeling of a fictional place that has been lived in long enough to feel real. You have been in that world tonight, walking through all of its rooms, spending time with all of its people. Peter Griffin with his beer and his reckless heart. Brian with his notebook and his martini glass and his unfinished things. Stewie with his schemes and his Rupert and his 1-year-old body that requires sleep no matter what he thinks about it. Lois holding everything together while the chaos swirls. Meg trying to be seen. Chris trying to understand. Quagmire and Joe and Cleveland holding down their separate territories in the neighborhood, bound to each other by the ritual of friendship. The Drunken Clam has served its last drink of the night. The Pawtucket Brewery is dark until the morning shift. The news anchors at Quahog 5 have signed off. The mayor's office is empty, the mayor presumably conducting some private eccentric project in the mayoral residence. The school is locked, the pharmacy is locked, the street is quiet. And, somewhere in the overlap between wakefulness and sleep, in the specific softness of a mind that is letting go of the day, you are still here. In Quahog, on Spooner Street, in the house at 31 where the front door is red and the paint is slightly yellow from years of New England weather, where the living room smells like a lived-in living room and the kitchen has one drawer that serves as a home for things without better homes. You are still here, and the night is doing what nights do, which is becoming morning so slowly that you cannot quite catch it happening. The darkness outside the window is less than it was. Not light yet. Not even close to light. But less dark. Which is a beginning. Stay here for a little while longer. There is no rush. The world of Quahog will be here when you wake up. Peter will be doing something inadvisable. Brian will be at the table with his notebook and his intentions. Stewie will be on to the next plan, whatever it is, with the absolute confidence of a 1-year-old who has never once doubted that he will succeed. Meg will be trying. She is always trying. And in the best episodes, in the ones that remember who she was before the show found it easier to use her as a target, she succeeds at things. Quietly, without the family noticing right away. But she succeeds. The night air over Rhode Island is very clean this late. The Atlantic is a few miles east and you can almost smell it, that particular combination of salt and cold water and distance that the ocean always carries. The Griffin house has its windows slightly open on warm nights, and the salt air comes through and mixes with the interior smells of the house, the carpet, the kitchen, the particular combination of bodies and food and time that a family home accumulates. This is where we rest tonight. Not at the end of everything, not with all questions answered. Just here, in this world, in this quiet, in the specific late-night warmth of a show that at its best was genuinely about something about family and love and the spectacular, unending capacity of human beings to make things harder for themselves than they need to be and then, somehow, eventually, come back together around the table. The house on Spooner Street, the red front door, the slightly yellow paint, the maple trees on the sidewalk, the Drunken Clam, dark and closed, Spooner Street, quiet. Section 15. The animation, frame by frame. One of the things that gets discussed least when people talk about Family Guy because the jokes are louder, the controversy is more immediate, and the characters take up all the conversational space is the actual visual language of the show, the way it looks. The specific choices made in how the characters are drawn and how they move, and what the world around them looks like, and how all of those visual decisions contribute to the overall experience of watching. Animation is not a passive art form. Every frame is a choice. Every movement of a character's arm, every background detail in a room, every color in a shot, every angle of a camera that doesn't physically exist, all of it is deliberate, the result of decisions made by artists and directors working through a production pipeline that, for a major animated television series, involves dozens of people across multiple countries and sometimes multiple studios. Family Guy in its original 3 seasons had a specific visual quality that longtime fans describe with particular affection. The outlines of the characters were slightly thicker in some shots and slightly looser in others. The colors were warm, a lot of ochres and golds and rich browns in interior scenes, with a natural light quality that suggested the show was set in a real place rather than a constructed studio world. The characters moved in a way that had a slight imprecision to it, a looseness that made them feel like they were being animated by people who were having fun with the drawings rather than simply executing them efficiently. Rough Draft Studios, the Korean animation studio that handled the animation for seasons 2 and 3 of the original run, brought a specific energy to the show's visual identity. Their work had a fluidity that matched the comedy. When Peter fell down, he fell in a way that communicated weight and momentum. When Stewie built something elaborate, the cutaways showing his process had the quality of someone who genuinely understood how things were constructed and could show you that in drawn form. The expressiveness of the characters' faces, the range of emotions that a relatively simple cartoon face could communicate, was calibrated in those seasons to a point where a single raised eyebrow from Brian could carry the entire weight of a comedic reaction. The backgrounds in the early seasons are worth attention on their own terms. The Griffin house's interior is drawn with a specificity that goes beyond pure functionality. The living room has the visual chaos of a genuinely lived-in space magazines on the coffee table that belong there, lamp placement that suggests someone arranged the furniture without particularly consulting an interior designer, the particular quality of a carpet that has been vacuumed regularly but is showing its age. The kitchen has appliances in the positions of real appliances in real kitchens, not the abstracted versions that more stylized animated shows use. The neighborhood exteriors have a late 20th century New England quality that you can feel even if you have never been to Rhode Island. The mature trees on the sidewalk, the specific architectural style of the houses, the way the light falls in the afternoon on a suburban street. The character designs themselves are worth unpacking. Seth MacFarlane's drawing style, which informs all the major characters' appearances, tends toward a simplified realism, not abstract, not cartoonishly exaggerated, but not photorealistic either. Peter Griffin's design communicates everything about who he is before he speaks a single word. The round belly, the protruding chin, the glasses with their round frames, the posture that leans slightly forward with the casual confidence of someone who is always about to say something. His hands are drawn large, which is a visual choice that reinforces his physical presence. His eyes are small and slightly glazed, the eyes of a man who is receiving impressions from the world but not always processing them in the standard sequence. Brian's design is elegantly simple. He stands on 2 legs, wears no clothes in most of his appearances, has the proportions of a Labrador mix drawn by someone who wanted him to read as simultaneously human and dog without committing fully to either. His posture changes depending on his emotional state in ways that are subtle enough to reward close attention. He stands more upright when he is confident, slightly slumped when he is defeated, with a specific quality of resignation in his body language that is as much a part of his characterization as anything he says. Stewie's design is the most unusual of the main cast. His head is shaped like a football, which is one of the show's most enduring visual jokes in itself. The specific shape communicates both oddity and a kind of aerodynamic absurdity. This is not the skull shape of a normal infant. It is the skull shape of something that grew in conditions that were not exactly standard. His eyes are wide set and often carry an expression that sits right on the line between babyish and sinister, which is the exact line his character inhabits. His yellow shirt, his red overalls, his Mary Jane shoes, all drawn with the precise care of a costume designer who understood that Stewie's clothes needed to look like a baby's clothes, while simultaneously suggesting a character who would prefer to be wearing something more militaristic. The visual comedy of the show in its early seasons also had a specific physical sensibility that the later seasons sometimes lost. When Peter walked into a wall, the way he walked into the wall, the angle of approach, the moment of contact, the specific sound effect used, the aftermath was choreographed in a way that made the physical comedy land with genuine impact. When Stewie operated machinery, his movements were scaled to reflect that he was tiny and that the machinery was designed for larger operators, which required him to improvise in ways that were animated with care. The physical world of the show in those early seasons had a consistency that made the comedy of characters moving through it more precise and more effective. One of the most interesting visual choices in the show's history is the decision about what the background characters look like. In many animated shows, background characters are simplified to the point of near abstraction blobs of color that suggest human presence without committing to human specificity. Family Guy, particularly in its early seasons, populated its backgrounds with characters who had enough visual distinctiveness to feel like real people living real lives adjacent to the main action. The patrons of the Drunken Clam were not identical placeholder figures. The students in the halls of James Woods Regional High School had visual variety. These choices made the world feel inhabited rather than staged, and that feeling of inhabitation is part of what makes the early show feel warm. The color palette of the exterior sequences, the shots of Spooner Street, the establishing shots of the neighborhood, the outdoor scenes at various locations around the fictional town was chosen with a specific awareness of Rhode Island's visual character. The colors of New England are different from the colors of California or Texas or the Pacific Northwest. The light is different. The greens of the trees have a specific saturation. The brick of older buildings has a particular tone. The sky has the quality of a sky that knows winter is coming, even in summer. These are subtle things, the kind of things you do not consciously register but that contribute to the overall sense of place. The show's animation evolved significantly after its return in 2005, and the evolution was not entirely in the direction of improvement. The fourth season used different studios and brought a cleaner, smoother style that looked more polished in a technical sense but lost some of the expressive looseness of the rough draft seasons. The outlines became more uniform. The characters' movements became more restricted. The colors were brighter and more saturated in a way that looked better on a high-definition television but felt less organic than the warmer palette of the original run. By seasons 6 and 7, the animation was being handled by Digital Imation, whose work had the competent but somewhat flat quality of a studio that was executing the work efficiently without bringing the same visual passion that characterized the earlier seasons. The characters moved correctly. The backgrounds were detailed. But there was a quality of life in the animation that had diminished, the specific sense that the drawings were moving because they wanted to, rather than because they had been moved. This matters more than it might seem for a show that is primarily verbal, where the jokes come from the words and the cutaways and the character dynamics, rather than from the visual storytelling. It matters because comedy and animation is inseparable from timing, and timing and animation is inseparable from movement. The way a character's arm moves in the moment before a punchline lands can affect whether the punchline lands. The speed at which a facial expression changes can determine whether a reaction is funny or flat. These are granular decisions, made frame by frame, and the cumulative effect of those decisions is the difference between animation that feels alive and animation that feels adequate. The cutaway gags, which we have already discussed in structural terms, also have a visual dimension that is worth noting. Each cutaway is a small, self-contained piece of animation that establishes a completely different visual world. The medieval kingdom where something vaguely Family Guy related is happening, the space station, the 1970s game show, the silent film. Each of these alternate worlds has its own visual grammar, its own color palette, its own drawing style, its own sense of proportion and movement. The early cutaways often shifted styles more dramatically, which was part of their comedy. The main show's style would abruptly give way to a visual environment that felt genuinely different, which amplified the sense of dislocation. The title card that appears at the beginning of every episode Family Guy, in bold font, over the establishing shot of the town has remained largely unchanged through the show's entire run, which is itself a visual statement. The show's identity, whatever else has changed, has a consistent face that it presents to the audience before every episode. There is something reassuring in that consistency. The way that a familiar handwriting or a familiar album cover is reassuring, you know where you are before you even begin. Section 16. The Writing Room Through the Years. Every television show is the product of its writing room, and Family Guy's writing room has changed more dramatically than most shows over the course of its run. The original team that Seth MacFarlane assembled for the first 3 seasons established a tone and a sensibility that became the show's identity. The dissolution and reformation of that team through 2 cancellations and a 3-year absence changed the show in ways that are still being felt. The original writing staff included Chris Sheridan, Danny Smith, Gary Janetti, Ricky Blitt, Neil Goldman, Garrett Donovan, Matt Weitzman, and Mike Barker. These writers were young, energetic, and deeply committed to a specific kind of comedy, layered, referential, culturally wide-ranging, but anchored in the specific world of the Griffin family. The best writers in any comedy room are the ones who have done the reading. They know the cultural history that the jokes are drawing from. They understand the mechanics of why jokes land and why they don't. They have a shared grammar with the creator that lets them contribute to a vision rather than simply executing instructions. Gary Janetti, who wrote Road to Rhode Island, went on to a distinguished career in comedy writing that included Will and Grace and eventually his own social media presence that became a significant cultural force on its own terms. His contributions to Family Guy in those early seasons were fundamental to what the show was. The road to episodes he originated became one of the show's defining categories. The fact that he was one of the people who moved on when the show was canceled is significant, because when you lose a writer of that caliber, you lose specific things that cannot simply be replaced by hiring someone with comparable credits. Danny Smith, who grew up in Smithfield, Rhode Island, which is one of the reasons the show's Rhode Island references have always felt specific and earned rather than generic, was a crucial voice in establishing the geographic and cultural specificity of the show's world. When the Griffins reference specific Rhode Island landmarks, specific Rhode Island food, specific Rhode Island social attitudes, that specificity has roots in real knowledge, and some of that knowledge came from Smith and his familiarity with the place. The writing room process for an animated comedy is different from a live-action show in specific ways that shape the final product. Live-action comedies often have a room full of writers generating jokes in real time, with the best ones ending up in the final script. Animated comedies, because of the much longer production pipeline, scripts are written months before animation begins, and animation finishes many months before broadcast, require a different kind of planning. The room has to commit to choices earlier and stick with them longer, because changing a line after animation has begun is expensive in time and resources. This production structure rewards writers who can see episodes whole, who can plan the arc of a story from its premise to its conclusion before they have seen any of it executed. It also rewards writers who understand the specific visual grammar of the show they are writing, who know what a cutaway will look like before it is animated, who understand which jokes need physical comedy and which need timing, and which need the specific quality of a particular character's voice. Seth MacFarlane's deep involvement in the early seasons meant that the writing room had a constant point of reference for those decisions. When a writer was unsure whether a joke would land, they could ask the creator, who would know, because he was the one who had to perform most of the characters and understood what worked in his own voice. As the show grew and MacFarlane became less available for day-to-day involvement, the room had to develop its own internal compass. Rich Appel and Alex Sulkin, who became the showrunners when MacFarlane stepped back from active creative leadership around 2011, were both experienced writers who had been with the show for years. Their sensibility was professional and competent. They understood Family Guy deeply, but the difference between understanding a show deeply and having built it from scratch is real, and it shows up in the choices that get made when the show is at a crossroads. The 2007 to 2008 Writers Guild of America strike was a significant disruption to the show's creative momentum. The WGA strike, which ran from November 2007 through February 2008, was fought primarily over residuals from DVD sales, and digital distribution writers wanted a share of the revenue that studios were generating from content that writers had created. MacFarlane was a vocal supporter of the strike and joined picketers. The disruption to the writing schedule was significant, and the sense of momentum and coherence that a room builds over a season was interrupted in ways that took time to recover. The 2023 WGA strike, which was broader and in some ways more consequential than its predecessor, again disrupted Family Guy's production. The landscape of television was different by 2023 streaming, had fundamentally changed the economics of the industry, and the issues at stake in the strike were correspondingly larger. MacFarlane again stood with the writers, but the strike's impact on the show's creative output added another disruption to a production that had already been navigating considerable creative challenges. What a great writing room does for a show is not just generate good jokes, it maintains the show's identity over time. It is the mechanism by which a show remembers who it is and what it is about, from one season to the next. It is the place where the question of whether a joke is too mean or not mean enough gets answered, where the question of whether a character should do something gets measured against the accumulated understanding of who that character is. Without a strong, stable room with a shared vision, these questions get answered differently by different writers on different days, and the show loses consistency. The Family Guy room in its various configurations has produced episodes of genuine brilliance scattered throughout the show's run, even in seasons that are not generally considered the show's best. This says something important about the base level of talent that the room maintained, that even in a difficult creative period, even when the show was making choices that longtime fans found frustrating, there were writers present who could produce something special. The problem was not that the talent disappeared. The problem was that the talent was not always being pointed in the right direction. The addition of more women to the writing staff in later seasons, which the show's own behind-the-scenes history credits with influencing the reduction of the sustained cruelty toward Meg's character, is an example of how room composition affects output. Different people bring different instincts to the same characters, different senses of where lines are and should be. A room that is demographically homogeneous in any direction tends to develop blind spots, and Family Guy's room in its earlier post-revival seasons was dominated by sensibilities that found certain kinds of comedy easier to reach for than others. The broadening of the room's composition produced a broadening of the show's range, not uniformly or immediately, but measurably over time. Section 17, Rhode Island, the real one. Part of what gives the world of Family Guy its texture is that Rhode Island, the actual state in which the fictional town of Quahog is located, is itself a genuinely unusual place. It is the smallest state in the Union by area, roughly 48 miles long and 37 miles wide at its greatest extents. Its official name is the State of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations, which is the longest official name of any state in the country and which most people who live there have never said in full. The Providence Plantations part was voted to be removed from the official name in 2020. Rhode Island was founded in 1636 by Roger Williams, who had been banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony for his unorthodox religious views, specifically his insistence on the separation of church and state, and his belief that the colonists had no right to take land from the native peoples without purchase. Williams purchased land from the Narragansett and Wampanoag peoples and founded Providence as a place of religious tolerance. This origin, a state born from exile and nonconformity, built on the principle that people with different beliefs should be left alone, gives Rhode Island a specific cultural identity that has persisted in various forms through the centuries. New Englanders have a reputation for a particular kind of personality, self-sufficient, slightly skeptical of outsiders, possessed of a dry humor that can be mistaken for unfriendliness until you understand the register. There is warmth in the region, but it is not the immediately demonstrative warmth of the South or the studied sociability of the West Coast. It is a warmth that reveals itself gradually, through repeated contact and shared experience, through the ritual of showing up at the same bar or the same neighborhood event enough times that you become part of the furniture. Peter Griffin's social world, The Drunken Clam, Spooner Street, the brewery operates on exactly this principle of accumulated familiarity. Rhode Island's economy has historically been tied to manufacturing, fishing, and the sea. The jewelry industry is a major employer. Education is significant, with Brown University and the Rhode Island School of Design among the prestigious institutions based in Providence. The coastline is one of the most beautiful in New England, with rocky headlands and sandy beaches and the particular blue of Narragansett Bay on a clear day. Newport. In Newport County, where the fictional town of Quahog is located within the show's geography, is famous for its Gilded Age mansions, summer retreats for the American wealthy class of the 19th and early 20th centuries, and its America's Cup sailing history. The class dynamics embedded in Family Guy's world have Rhode Island roots. Lois Pewterschmidt's wealthy family background, her father's Newport County social circles, The contrast between that world and the Spooner Street working-class neighborhood where she and Peter live, these dynamics map onto real Rhode Island social geography, where the proximity of old money Newport and working-class Providence creates exactly this kind of tension. You can drive from a neighborhood that looks like the Griffin Street to a mansion that would not be out of place in the Pewter-Schmidt universe in under 30 minutes, which is a specifically Rhode Island experience of inequality. The Quahog clam itself, which gives the fictional town its name, is worth understanding as a real thing before it becomes a symbol. Hard clams, the technical name, are one of the oldest and most continuously harvested shellfish in New England. Native peoples had been harvesting them from the waters of Narragansett Bay for thousands of years before European arrival. The shells, particularly the purple interior of the shell, were used to make wampum, the bead currency that was significant in trade relationships throughout the northeastern Atlantic coast. The clam is not just a food source in this region. It is a cultural artifact with a history that predates the colonial period by millennia. In the show's world, the quahog is primarily a geographical joke, a name chosen because it is funny-sounding and Rhode Island-specific. But its deeper history gives it a grounding that the show sometimes acknowledges, and more often leaves implicit. When you say the name of the fictional town, you are saying the name of a creature that has been living in the bay for as long as there has been a bay. And that creature has survived everything the coast has thrown at it by burying itself in the sand and waiting. There is something in that persistence that rhymes with the show's own improbable longevity. Seth MacFarlane's connection to Rhode Island is personal as well as educational. His years at RISD gave him the specific visual education that informs his approach to character design and animation. RISD graduates have a particular kind of eye trained to see the relationship between form and function, to understand that visual choices carry meaning, to approach making things with both technical precision and conceptual rigor. That education shows up in the specificity of Family Guy's design choices, even when those choices are deployed in service of a joke about a man falling downstairs. The Providence art and music scene, which has long been one of the most interesting in New England, also informs the show's cultural sensibility. Providence has historically been a city where experimental art and mainstream culture coexist with unusual ease, where the presence of two major art schools creates a constant influx of creative energy that mixes with the existing working class and immigrant communities of the city. The particular combination of highbrow cultural aspiration and lowbrow practical reality that defines much of Family Guy's comedy is, in some ways, a Providence sensibility. When you watch the early episodes of Family Guy with Rhode Island in mind, with an awareness of what that place actually is, what it feels like, what the light is like in October when the leaves are turning and the Atlantic air has sharpened, the show's world becomes richer. The jokes about the drunken clam feel like jokes about the actual bars on Atwell's Avenue in Providence. The references to McCoy Stadium feel like references to a real place that real people go to. The texture of the fictional town has real soil in it, and knowing that real soil is there makes the fiction feel more substantial. Section 18, Every Corner of the Griffin House. We have visited the house on Spooner Street in broad strokes tonight, moving through it quickly enough to establish its presence without fully inhabiting it. Now, in this later hour, the hour when detail is the most soothing thing because it gives the mind something specific to attach to, something concrete enough to follow without being demanding enough to keep you fully awake, we are going to go through the house properly. Room by room, corner by corner. The front door, as established, is red. The specific shade is the kind of red that is confident without being aggressive, not fire engine, not burgundy, but a medium red that has weathered enough seasons to have settled into itself. The door knocker is brass, shaped like a standard knocker, and it has that slight patina that brass knockers develop when nobody is polishing them regularly, which is to say it looks like a knocker in a house where the priority list is long and doorknob maintenance ranks below most items on it. There is a doorbell. It works approximately 70% of the time. The front hallway inside the door is narrow and short. It is less a room than a transitional space, the kind of hallway that exists to connect the outside to the inside without pretending to be an interior feature in itself. There is a mat on the floor that has done its job through many seasons of New England weather, absorbing the mud of November and the tracked-in salt of January and the general outdoor debris of every month in between. There is a coat rack on the right-hand wall, which holds more coats than it was designed for, because the Griffins are not systematic about seasonal coat rotation. The staircase rises to the right, with the particular angle of a staircase in a 1990s-built suburban house, Steep enough to be efficient, not so steep as to be alarming. The railing is wood, with a newel post at the bottom that is solid if not particularly elegant. Stewie has used this staircase for various purposes over the years that its original builders would not have anticipated. Peter has fallen on it numerous times in ways that are consistently his own fault. The living room is the heart of the house. Not because it is the most important room in terms of function, the kitchen might be that, but because it is where the family's collective life happens in its most visible form. The television is the room's clear organizing principle. Everything is arranged in relationship to the television. The couch faces it at the optimal viewing distance. The two chairs flanking the couch provide secondary viewing positions for guests or family members who are not claiming couch space. The coffee table between the couch and the television is at a height designed for feet, for the particularly American domestic practice of watching television with your feet up on the coffee table, which is comfortable enough to be nearly universal and which Lois periodically requests people stop doing. The television itself has been updated over the years as the show's timeline has moved forward, though not always in the way that real families update televisions. Early on, it was a tube-set boxy, heavy, with a specific quality of picture that flatter screen technology has made feel nostalgic. Later seasons gave the Griffins a flat screen. The remote control is always somewhere other than where it should be, which is the condition of all remote controls in all living rooms everywhere. The couch has a specific presence. It is the kind of couch that started its life as a reasonable piece of furniture and has gradually become something more organic, shaped by the specific bodies that have sat on it in specific ways at specific times, developing character through use rather than through design. The cushions do not always return to their starting positions after they have been disturbed. There is a throw blanket that lives on the couch during the cooler months and migrates to other parts of the house in summer. The bookshelf in the corner of the living room holds a mixture of things that are not all books. There are some books, Lois's, mostly. There are objects that have accumulated on shelves the way objects accumulate when nobody is actively curating. A bowling trophy from several seasons ago, a framed photograph that leans against another framed photograph, a plant that is doing adequately despite inconsistent watering. The shelf communicates a household in which culture is valued but not performatively, in which a bookshelf exists because there are books to put somewhere, rather than because the household wants to communicate that it is the kind of household that has bookshelves. The kitchen is adjacent to the living room, and separated from it by a half-wall and a counter that functions as both a physical divider and a social transition zone. You can stand at the counter and talk to people in the living room while also being in the kitchen, which is the specific spatial quality that open-plan American domestic architecture optimized for. Lois spends more time in the kitchen than any other character. Her relationship with the kitchen is one of competent management. She knows where everything is, she knows how the stove works, she knows which cabinet has what and in what order. The kitchen works because she makes it work. The refrigerator is white, rounded at the corners in the style of American refrigerators of a certain era, and it contains a specific archaeology of the Griffin family's dietary habits. There is beer. There is always beer, whatever is left from the most recent purchase, arranged in the specific order that Peter arranged it when he put it away, which may or may not correspond to any organizational logic. There is a collection of condiments on the door shelf that has been accumulating longer than any of them should technically be consumed, but which nobody has systematically addressed. There is a drawer that has deli items and occasionally things that are not deli items. The kitchen table is round, which is a domestic architectural choice that communicates something about how the space was designed for use. Round tables have no head, no foot, no position of authority, which either promotes equality or simply avoids the need to negotiate about it. The chairs around the table are mismatched in a way that suggests they were gathered over time rather than purchased as a set. Family meals at the kitchen table happen with the casual chaos of family meals everywhere. Not everyone arrives at the same time, not everyone stays for the same duration, the conversation is distributed unevenly, and the food is eaten with varying degrees of attention to the food itself. Upstairs, the landing at the top of the stairs connects the 4 bedrooms and the bathroom. The bathroom is shared in the way that family bathrooms are shared, which is to say imperfectly, with the recurring negotiations about scheduling and the specific frustrations of multiple people needing the same space in the morning. The medicine cabinet holds the usual collection of pharmaceutical history, things that were needed once and are still there in case they are needed again, arranged in no particular order. Peter and Lois's bedroom is the largest in the house, as master bedrooms traditionally are. It has the quality of a room that is lived in, fully, not staged or pristine but not chaotic either. Lois's organizing influence is visible in the bedroom in a way that it sometimes is not in the more public spaces of the house, because the bedroom is where she has the most control over the environment. The nightstand on her side has the books already mentioned. Peter's nightstand has a glass of water and the television remote, which is the nightstand of a man whose bedtime routine involves watching until he falls asleep rather than reading until he is sleepy. Meg's room, as imagined generously, has become more personalized as the seasons have progressed. Teenage rooms are self-portraits, arrangements of the objects and images in colors that feel like expressions of identity and progress. Meg's identity is in a longer state of being figured out than most teenagers, in part because the process has been complicated by a family environment that has not always supported the work. But in her room, in the space she controls, there are choices. Posters of musicians she likes. A desk that has the organized but not pristine quality of a desk belonging to someone who does homework there but also uses the surface for other things. A mirror that she passes, sometimes quickly and sometimes lingers in front of, in the way of anyone who is still negotiating their relationship with what they see. Chris's room has the comfortable disorder already described, but it also has his art supplies, because Chris draws and paints with a natural ability that he does not always know how to value. The drawings tucked into the corner of his mirror, the sketchbooks on the shelf, the colored pencils in the cup on his desk, these are the visible evidence of a talent that the show gave him in the early seasons and returned to periodically. A drawing he made of Peter hangs on the wall, framed, because Peter asked for it, which is one of those small moments of genuine affection between father and son that the show was capable of when it let itself be. Stewie's room, at the end of the hall, is last. The door is often closed. Not locked. Lois can come in any time and frequently does, to check on him, to change him, to tell him dinner is ready in that particular tone that parents use when the tone is really a form of love but habitually closed, because Stewie is a person who needs a door between himself and the rest of the household to do his work effectively. Inside, the room is simultaneously completely expected and completely not. The crib, the changing table, the colorful rug with the letters of the alphabet on it, these are the elements of a nursery. The whiteboard covered in equations, the components of devices in various stages of assembly on the shelves above the closet, the drawer that contains tools rather than baby things, these are the elements of a laboratory. The portrait of himself in a general's uniform on the wall. Rupert on the shelf, watching everything with the fixed and unrevealing expression of a stuffed bear who has seen more than he can communicate. The house on Spooner Street, room by room, holds more than its square footage would suggest. Every room contains a character, and every character contains a world, and those worlds overlap and intersect in the specific way of a family living under one roof. The house is small enough to be intimate and large enough to allow everyone their separate space, and the balance between those two things, intimacy and space, closeness and privacy, is what gives the show's family dynamics their push and pull. Everyone is always just slightly too close to everyone else, which generates the friction that generates the comedy, but also the warmth, because friction only exists between things that are in contact, and contact is another word for connection. Section 19. Favorite moments. Held gently. There is a list that every Family Guy fan carries somewhere in their mind. Not necessarily a formal ranking, not a listicle of top episodes, but a collection of moments. Specific instance, specific exchanges, specific visual gags or emotional beats that have stayed with them across years and rewatches. Tonight, in the quietest part of the night, we are going to move through some of those moments slowly, holding each one up to the low light of this hour and looking at what makes it what it is. The moment in Road to Rhode Island when Brian tells Stewie about his mother. The actual physical mother, the dog. The specific painful history of what happened to her and what Brian's relationship to that history has been. It arrives unexpectedly in the middle of what has been primarily a comedy episode, and it arrives with a directness that catches you off guard. The show does not protect you from the emotion of it. Brian is talking about a loss that is real and that he has been carrying, and Stewie listens with a quality of attention that he does not usually give to adults. For a few minutes in the middle of a silly road trip episode, the show is about grief, and it handles that transition with extraordinary care. The moment in Petarded when Peter, having been informed that he is technically intellectually disabled, uses this classification to win a game at a church fair that previously he could not win because he was competing as an adult. The joke is not cruel. It is not at Peter's expense in a mean-spirited way. It is about the specific character of a man who responds to new information not with shame or denial but with creative pragmatism, who takes whatever the situation is and figures out what it allows him to do. That is very Peter, and it is the Peter of the early seasons, not a monster, not a villain, but a man of enormous creative flexibility in the face of his own limitations. The moment in the first season episode Mind Over Murder when Peter builds a bar in the basement of the Griffin house to avoid being forced to attend Meg's soccer games and to compete with the drunken clam. The bar, equipped with everything a proper bar needs, with a specific attention to detail that suggests Peter may have thought about this longer than he has thought about most things, becomes a genuine neighborhood institution within the episode. For a brief time, Peter has built something. He has created a place. The joy he takes in it, the particular pride of a man who has made something with his hands that other people want to use, is genuinely affecting, even before the episode turns toward its inevitable complications. The moment in Brian and Stewie when Brian tells Stewie about the gun, the delivery of the line, the specific quietness of it, the way it lands in the middle of a conversation that seemed to be heading somewhere else, changes the temperature of everything around it. The episode had been building towards something, and this is what it was building toward. Honesty, of the kind that is only available at a certain hour, in a certain kind of confinement, between people who trust each other enough for the truth to be safe. Stewie's response to this information, the way he processes it, the way he reacts without making it worse, is the best moment of his character's whole arc, because it shows that the love between these two characters is specific and real and adult even when one of them is technically a baby. The moment in A Mission Impossible when Stewie travels into Lois's reproductive system to prevent the conception of a potential rival sibling and discovers, in the process, that the universe is indifferent to his plans in a way that even his considerable intelligence cannot fully account for. It is a farce episode, a broad comedy, and it works completely on those terms. But it also has a moment near the end that recontextualizes Stewie's relationship with his family in a way that is briefly and unexpectedly tender, and that tenderness is earned rather than inserted. The moment in Stewie Loves Lois, the Season 5 premiere, where Stewie, having had an unexpectedly warm encounter with Lois in which she rescues him from a humiliation, completely reformulates his attitude toward her. The episode tracks the evolution and then the dissolution of Stewie's sudden adoration of his mother with the specific comedy of a character whose emotional compass swings widely in both directions. But it also contains something genuine about the complexity of a child's relationship with a parent, the way admiration and resentment and love and fear all coexist in the same small heart, shifting their proportions from hour to hour. The moment in Da Boom, the second season episode set in the aftermath of Y2K, when the Griffin family, having survived the end of the world as they understood it, sets up a community in a Twinkie factory, and Peter begins to see himself as a kind of post-apocalyptic patriarch. The episode is a sustained piece of world-building comedy that imagines what happens when you take the specific chaos of the Griffin household and amplify it by removing all the normal social infrastructure around them. The Griffins in the post-apocalypse are the same Griffins they have always been, just in a different context, which is both the joke and the observation. The moment in To Love and Die in Dixie when the Griffin family has to flee to the Deep South after Chris witnesses a crime and must be hidden from the criminal he can identify. The family's experience in the South, their navigation of a cultural context that is completely alien to their New England sensibility, produces some of the early show's best fish out of water comedy, but it also produces genuine character work. Chris finds a kind of freedom in this new context. Meg makes a friend who genuinely likes her, and the episode ends with something approaching bittersweet rather than simply comedic. These moments, and the many others like them, scattered through the seasons, share a quality that is easier to feel than to describe. They are moments where the show was doing something more than getting to the next joke. They were doing what the best long-form storytelling does, which is showing you who these people are in a way that makes you care about them, makes you want to spend time with them, makes you feel that the world they inhabit is a real place inhabited by real people, even though the world is fictional and the people are drawings. That is the magic of the show at its peak. And that magic is what we are here for tonight, what you came for, what you have been resting in through all these quiet hours. Not the controversy, not the ratings, not the debates about quality, just the feeling of being in the world of a show that at its best made you love it for real reasons, reasons that hold up when you look at them carefully. Section 20. The long exhale, falling asleep in Quahog. By now the night has done most of what it was going to do. The house on Spooner Street is as quiet as it gets. The words are becoming slower, longer, more spread out, the way words feel when the mind that is receiving them is settling into rest. The sentences are like the rhythm of breathing in, hold, out, and the content of them is becoming less important than the warmth of their presence. The simple fact that something is being said and that what is being said is familiar and safe. This is what late night does. It strips away the urgency. Nothing is pressing right now. The day is over. The obligations of tomorrow are at a distance that feels, in this particular hour, almost infinite. There is just this room, this screen, this voice, and the soft fictional world of Rhode Island that we have been walking through together tonight. The animation on the screen, if you are still watching, and it does not matter if you are or are not, has that late-night quality of images that are simultaneously vivid and dreamlike. Colors a little brighter than they need to be. Movements a little smoother than the real world. The drunken clam lit up in its particular neon. Peter at the bar with his beer. Quagmire saying something that requires the audience to decide whether to be offended or to laugh. Joe thumping the table with his massive fist for emphasis. Cleveland's slow, steady reactions serving as the calm before Peter does the next inadvisable thing. These images are comfortable. Not because they are comforting in any conventional sense. The show is frequently the opposite of conventional comfort. But because they are familiar in a way that has accrued through repeated exposure, through the specific kind of intimacy that develops between a viewer and a world they have spent real hours inside. You know these people. You know what Peter is going to do before he does it. You know what Brian's expression means before he says anything. You know the sound of Stewie's voice, the specific British vowels, the precise theatrical disdain that is also, underneath, a kind of love. Knowing a world that well is its own form of rest. You do not have to work to follow it. You do not have to decode it or orient yourself within it. You are already oriented. You are already home in it, in the way that a familiar piece of music is a home. You know where it is going before it gets there, and that knowing is pleasure rather than boredom. The fictional town of Quahog, Rhode Island, in the middle of the night. Newport County, the sound of the Atlantic, if you listen for it. A few miles to the east, the particular deep sound of a large body of water moving against a coast, a sound that has been happening since long before anyone was there to hear it and will continue long after. The marsh grass along the bay shore, the specific smell of it in the autumn, cold and salt and something organic and old. The lights of Providence to the north, a low orange glow against the overcast sky. The Griffin House at 31 Spooner Street, the red door, the slightly yellow paint, the staircase on the right, the television in the living room, off now, reflecting the room in its dark screen like a mirror that has no pretensions to accuracy. The couch with its history of evenings, the kitchen with its organized imperfection. Upstairs, the 4 bedrooms, each containing a sleeping person, each person dreaming their own version of the next day. Brian at the kitchen table again, actually. He came back downstairs an hour ago, which is what Brian does when the mind won't let him sleep. The notebook is open. The pen is in his hand. He has written one sentence and then stopped, but the one sentence is real and it is good, and tomorrow he will write another one. That is how things get written. In the end, one sentence, a pause, another sentence, the accumulation of small acts over a long time until something exists that did not exist before. Stewie is dreaming. In the dream, and the show has visited Stewie's dreams on a few occasions, always finding something stranger and more precisely imagined than you expected. The world is larger, and he is its appropriate size, which is to say very large. Rupert is there. Rupert is always there, in the dreams and in the waking. The whiteboard in the dream is infinite, scrolling outward in every direction, covered with the equations of everything Stewie has ever planned, and everything he might still plan, and everything that exists only in the potential of what he is. Meg has her headphones on, the music playing at a volume that is just below the threshold of keeping her awake. Something slow, something that has been moving through her mind for days, in the way that songs attach themselves to emotional states and become the soundtrack to a period that you only later understand the significance of. She is almost asleep now. She has been almost asleep for a while. The music is helping. Chris is fully asleep, completely, in the uncomplicated way that Chris does most things. He will wake up tomorrow with no memory of the transition from wakefulness to sleep, because for Chris, Sleep is not something that happens to him, it is something he does, a simple and efficient process that takes about 3 minutes and produces a high-quality result. Peter is asleep in the chair, which is where he always ends up when he falls asleep in front of the television. His head is at an angle that will make his neck sore tomorrow morning, but tonight he has no awareness of it. His breathing is deep and steady, the breathing of a man at complete peace with his own unconsciousness. He will dream about something wonderful and utterly absurd and remember none of it in the morning, which is the condition of his dreams in the same way that it is the condition of much of his waking life. Lois is in their bedroom, in that specific phase of sleep where the body is fully released and the mind is somewhere else entirely, somewhere that has the geography of the real world and the logic of something else. She is the last one to fully let go of the day, as she usually is, because the day holds more threads for her than for the others, and releasing them takes a few extra minutes. But she is there now. She is fully there. The house breathes with the particular slow rhythm of a house in the middle of the night, when all the occupants are still and the structure itself relaxes into the darkness. The heating system clicks on and off with its thermal logic. A floorboard settles somewhere with a sound too small to wake anyone. Outside, the maple trees on Spooner Street stand in the still air, their leaves just beginning in this imagined autumn night to show the first hints of the color that will come. The Drunken Clam's neon sign, dark as it should be at this hour, sits quietly above the door of the bar, its tubes holding the cold memory of the light they made all evening. By morning, it will start again. The warming of the gas, the gathering of the glow, the slow, brilliant announcement of a place that is open and ready for the day's first bad decisions and the day's first uncomplicated pleasures. Joe Swanson's porch light is still on. It is always on. It will be on when the first light of morning comes, and it will be on when the sky goes full dark again the following evening, because Joe is the kind of man who believes in the small, steady maintenance of things, in the principle that a porch light on is a signal to the neighborhood that someone is present and paying attention, and that signal matters more than the electricity it costs. The neighborhood is quiet in the specific deep way of a neighborhood at 3 in the morning, which is quieter than any other hour. Not the quiet of early evening, which still contains the echoes of the day. Not the quiet of just after midnight, which has the quality of a quiet that has recently settled. 3 in the morning is the quiet of the world at its lowest ebb, the trough between the waves of day, the place where the night has fully gathered itself and is holding completely still before the first suggestion of morning begins to shift the balance. You are in that quiet now. You have been in it for a while probably. The words washing past, the images behind your eyes shifting from the fictional street to whatever the inside of your own mind offers as it begins to let the day go. This is good. This is what this was for. The house on Spooner Street will be here tomorrow. Peter will be doing something inadvisable by 8 in the morning. Brian will have written a few more sentences by then, or will be pretending he has. Stewie will have a new plan, sketched out in the margins of the whiteboard, a plan that is only slightly different from the previous plans because the best plans are the ones you refine rather than abandon. Lois will be in the kitchen, making coffee, holding the household together with the quiet competence that she brings to the enterprise every day. Meg will be up before she needs to be, which is the habit of someone who was told enough times that she doesn't matter, that getting somewhere early has become a way of proving otherwise. She will have her own small victories today, the kind that don't always get witnessed, and that will be enough. It is enough. The town outside the house will be doing what small New England cities do in the morning, gathering itself. Its commuters and its students and its workers and its retirees, the whole civilian machinery of a place that has its routine and is executing it. The bay to the east will be doing what bays do, which is mostly just being. The Atlantic beyond the bay will be doing what it has been doing since before there was anyone to name it. And you, wherever you are tonight, whatever city, whatever country, whatever time zone has placed you in this particular darkness or this particular early morning, you are doing what you came here to do, which is resting. Letting the week go. Letting the day go. Letting the hours you have been carrying finally settle into the mattress beneath you. There is no rush. There is nowhere to be. The fictional Rhode Island night is long and quiet and completely unhurried, and it will stay exactly like this for as long as you need it to. Section 21. The characters we never stop thinking about. There is a quality that the best fictional characters share, and it is not complexity or likability or even consistency. It is the quality of feeling unfinished. Feeling like they exist somewhere beyond the edges of the screen, beyond the edges of the episode you are watching, like they had a morning before the story started and will have an evening after the credits roll. Characters with this quality are the ones you find yourself thinking about at odd moments, the ones who arrive unbidden in your mind when something in your actual life rhymes with something in theirs. Family Guy's best characters have this quality, and it is worth naming which ones and why. In the specific quiet of this late hour, when your own thoughts are moving slowly and can settle on a thing without needing to immediately move to the next thing. Peter Griffin arrives in your mind when you see someone at a barbecue or a neighborhood gathering who is clearly in over their head but is committed to the performance of confidence anyway. When you see a man who has decided that whatever is happening is going to be fine even though the evidence does not support this. There is a specific kind of good faith stupidity that Peter represents. He is not malicious in his core. He is just sincerely, completely, without reservation wrong about almost everything, and his wrongness is so total that it has a kind of purity. You think about Peter when you see someone fail at something with maximum commitment, and the failure, because of the commitment, becomes almost admirable. Brian arrives in your mind when you are in a situation where you know the right thing to say and do not say it. When you are the smartest person in a conversation and are not sure whether to deploy that or not. When you have been working on something for a long time and have not finished it, and you are not entirely sure why. Brian is the character of unfinished things, of good intentions and partial execution, of intelligence deployed in service of survival rather than achievement. You recognize him in yourself on the days when you know better and don't do better, and the recognition is both comfortable and slightly uncomfortable, which is the precise texture of a good fictional mirror. Stewie arrives in your mind when you encounter a child, any age who seems to be operating from an intelligence that their circumstances don't know about yet. When you see a very small person handling a very large situation with a calm that the adults around them cannot quite match, when you catch yourself thinking that you know exactly what you would do if only the world would give you the appropriate resources and remove the inappropriate constraints. Stewie is the fantasy of complete internal clarity in a world that does not offer you the physical authority to implement it, and that fantasy is recognizable to almost everyone who has ever felt underestimated. Lois arrives in your mind when you are managing something complicated and doing it well, and the people around you are not entirely aware of the effort this requires. When you are the organizational intelligence behind something that runs smoothly, and smoothly is invisible, and invisible means unthanked, she arrives when you find yourself holding a conversation together, holding a room together, holding a family together, and doing it without the acknowledgement that the holding requires, because the holding is what makes the acknowledgement possible, and the holding takes up all the room. Meg arrives in your mind when you feel overlooked. When the specific flavor of being in a room where you are the least interesting person, the most invisible person, the one whose absence would not immediately be noticed when that flavor surfaces in your actual life, Meg is there, providing a name for it that is both sad and somehow liberating, because a thing that has a name is a thing that has been recognized, and recognized things are less alone. These characters, in their unfinished quality, in their existence beyond the screen, are the reason we return. Not primarily for the jokes, though the jokes are real and good. Not primarily for the world, though the world is rich and detailed. Primarily for the characters themselves, the specific people, imaginary people, drawings, voices in recording booths who have become, over years and years of watching and rewatching, as familiar as anyone in our actual lives. This is not nothing. This is, in fact, quite a lot. The ability of fiction to populate your life with people who feel real, who feel present, who arrive in your thoughts and help you think through your own situations. By analogy, that is one of the great gifts of storytelling, and it is a gift that Family Guy, at its best, has been genuinely generous with. So when you sleep tonight, in the quiet of whatever room you are in whatever part of the world, with the fictional Rhode Island fading at the edges of your awareness, take these characters with you, not as assignments or analyses, but as company. The warm, familiar company of people you know well enough that their presence is comfortable rather than demanding. The company of Spooner Street, late at night, when everyone is asleep and the house breathes with its slow nocturnal rhythm and the Atlantic air moves through the maples outside. This is what the best stories do, in the end. They become a place you can go. And Quahog Rhode Island fictional, inconsistent, loud, warm, chaotic, funny, and occasionally genuinely moving is a place worth going. It has been a place worth going for over 25 years. It will be a place worth going for whatever years remain. The door is always red, the paint is always slightly yellow, the couch is always there, and the people inside, sleeping, are always exactly themselves. Section 22. The small hours, the small things. There is a specific pleasure to knowing a fictional world's smallest details, and Family Guy, over its long run, has accumulated enough of them to fill an evening comfortably on their own. Tonight, in the final stretch of this long wander through Quahog, we are going to slow down even further and rest with the smallest things, the details that don't drive stories, the things that just exist, in the background, in the corners, in the spaces between the jokes where the world breathes without anyone needing it to do anything specific. The specific sound the Griffin family's telephone makes when it rings. For most of the show's early run, it is a standard late 90s landline ring, 2 sharp tones, a pause, 2 more. The kind of ring that produced a specific kind of conditioned response in anyone who lived in a household with a landline, a Pavlovian attention-grabbing that has since been replaced by whatever particular notification sound your smartphone has been set to. The Griffin landline rings with the authority of an era when a ringing phone was an event, not an ambient data point. Nobody in the Griffin household screens calls with the sophistication of a contemporary smartphone user. The phone rings and someone picks it up, which is itself a particular kind of intimacy, the intimacy of answering without knowing who is there. The refrigerator hum, which is audible in quiet moments in the kitchen. The specific frequency of an American household refrigerator. The constant low mechanical effort of keeping things cold. The sound that becomes part of the background texture of a house, to the point where you stop hearing it as a sound and start hearing it as a quality of silence. The Griffin refrigerator has been humming for the whole run of the show, keeping the beer cold, keeping the leftovers preserved, working steadily through every episode regardless of what else is happening in the house. The specific creak of the third stair from the bottom. Every house has a stair that announces your presence, a board that has worked loose over years of feet passing over it in the specific pattern of a family's movement through their own home. The Griffin staircase has one, and in episodes that are quiet enough for it to be heard, it carries the weight of all the feet that have passed over it. Peter coming home late, Meg coming downstairs in the middle of the night for a glass of water, Stewie descending with whatever current device he has built for whatever current purpose. The light in Peter and Lois's bedroom window, visible from the street, in the early evening before they go to sleep. A warm yellow rectangle against the exterior of the house, the specific warmth of a bedroom light visible from outside, which is one of the most domestic images in the visual vocabulary of nighttime neighborhoods. A lit bedroom window seen from the outside communicates presence, warmth, occupation. Someone is in there, living their life, in the specific private way that bedrooms allow. The Griffin bedroom window in the early evening is one of those lights. The drawer in the kitchen. We have mentioned this drawer before, but it deserves its own sustained attention because the junk drawer is one of the most honest domestic objects there is. The junk drawer in a family home is the place where the organizational system acknowledges its own limits. Everything in a house needs a place, and the junk drawer is the place for everything that resists categorization. In the Griffin junk drawer, there are probably batteries of unknown charge status, a pair of scissors that made their way here from the office supplies, several takeout menus from restaurants that may or may not still be in business, a rubber band that has been there since the mid-2000s, a small flashlight whose batteries have definitely died, a notepad with phone numbers written on it in handwriting that might be Lois's or might be a previous owner of the house, a wine opener that nobody can quite figure out belongs to this kitchen, and at least 3 objects whose original purposes are no longer known. The view from the upstairs hallway window, which looks out over the backyard. The yard is not large, it is a suburban backyard of modest ambition, the kind of yard that gets used for summer barbecues and the occasional project, and mostly just exists as a green buffer between the house and the fence at the back. At night, the yard is lit only by whatever light escapes from the kitchen window, a warm glow that falls across the grass and creates a half-lit quality that turns the ordinary into something slightly mysterious. A bird might land out there at this hour, in the darkness at the edge of the light, going about its nocturnal business with the complete indifference to human domesticity that birds have. The specific weight of the TV remote in Peter's hand. The remote is worn at the edges from years of use, the rubber on the buttons slightly compressed and smoother than it was when new, the brand logo faded. It fits in Peter's hand in the way that an often handled object fits in the hand that has held it most conformed to the grip, familiar to the fingers. He picks it up and puts it down without looking. He can navigate the channels with the same muscle memory that other people navigate keyboards or musical instruments. The remote is an extension of Peter in his natural habitat, in the same way that Brian's martini glass is an extension of Brian. The particular quality of Sunday afternoon light in New England, slanting through the living room window at an angle that changes with the season. In October it comes in low and golden, the color of the autumn that is already well underway, with a warmth that is at odds with the cooling air outside. In January it is thinner and sharper, arriving earlier in the day and leaving earlier, with a quality of effort, like light that has traveled a long way and is tired. In May it is abundant and direct, filling the room with a generosity that the winter months did not allow. Each of these qualities of light has been in the Griffin living room at some point over the show's 25-plus-year history, whether or not the animation always captured them accurately. The sound of Spooner Street on a weekday morning, the specific domestic symphony of a residential neighborhood coming to life. Cars starting, doors closing. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower starting up an hour before it should. The school bus making its rounds. Children walking to the corner. Joe Swanson's car pulling out of his driveway with the particular note of a vehicle that has been maintained carefully. Cleveland in the early seasons, visible briefly in his doorway in a bathrobe, making a private face at the morning that nobody else can see. The way the drunken clam smells in the hour after it opens in the afternoon, when the cleaning from last night has been done but the evening hasn't properly begun yet. A bar at 4 in the afternoon has a specific smell that is different from both a bar in the evening and a bar in the morning. It has the traces of last night, the beer and the cooking and the many individual human presences, mixed with the cleaning products of the morning and the particular clean bar smell of a freshly wiped counter. The afternoon light comes through the window at the front and falls in strips across the floor, which is a kind of light that a bar rarely has in the evening, and that makes the place look different enough that it could almost be a different establishment. These are the small things, the details that constitute a world. They are not the plot, and they are not the characters, and they are not the jokes. They are the texture that the world is made of. The accumulation of specific sensory information that makes a fictional place feel real enough to inhabit in the imagination. The Griffin House has this texture. Quahog has it. Spooner Street, the Drunken Clam, the Pawtucket Brewery, the school, they all have it. And now, in these final minutes of this long night's journey through that world, the texture is all that remains. Not the story, not the analysis, not the biography of characters or the history of episodes, just the texture. The hum of the refrigerator, the warmth of the bedroom window, the creak of the third stair, the weight of the remote in a hand that knows it by feel. Let this be what you carry into sleep. Not anything that requires attention or processing, just the texture of a world you know, the specific, comfortable texture of a place you have spent time in, a world that has been generous with you, that has given you its jokes and its warmth and its occasional surprising depth, and asked only that you show up for it. You showed up. Tonight you really showed up. Good night.